The letter arrived on a Tuesday, and by Friday, Silas Mercer had already told 3 men in Denton County that the Cross Ranch would be his before the first snow fell. He didn't whisper it. He said it at the feed store counter, loud enough for the clerk to hear, loud enough for the 2 ranch hands waiting behind him to hear, and he smiled while he said it. The kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes because it was never meant to. He'd done the math. Cole Cross owed him $412 on a loan that had ballooned through interest into something closer to $600, and Cole Cross didn't have $600. Mercer knew that the way a man knows weather, not from looking at the sky, but from years of watching other men lose everything and learning exactly when the moment of collapse arrives. He laid his coins on the counter, picked up his tobacco, and walked out into the Arizona sun. He wasn't thinking about Cole Cross at all. He was thinking about the railroad. If you've ever crossed an ocean of distance to reach a man who wasn't there, if you've ever stood on a platform in a strange land with a trunk at your feet and nobody's name on your lips but a dead man's, then you already understand what happened to Evelyn Carter before this story even begins. This is not a gentle story, but it is a true one in the ways that matter most. Subscribe to this channel now and follow every part of Evelyn's journey, because the moment you think you know where this road leads, it turns. Like this video, and leave a comment telling us the city and country where you're watching from. We want to know how far this story has traveled. Don't miss what comes next. The train from Philadelphia to Tucson took 11 days, and by the time Evelyn Carter stepped onto the platform at Denton Station, she had read Nathan Cross's last letter so many times that the paper had gone soft at the folds. She wasn't a woman who cried easily. She had grown up in a household that didn't make room for it. Her father was a school teacher with strict ideas about composure, and her mother had died when Evelyn was 9, which meant Evelyn had learned early that grief was something you carried quietly or you didn't carry it at all. She was 31 years old. She had a trunk with 2 dresses, a copy of Middlemarch, her father's pocket watch, and a letter of introduction from Reverend Miles in Philadelphia, addressed to a man named Nathan Cross, rancher, Denton County, Arizona Territory. Nathan had written her 14 letters over the course of 8 months. She had kept everyone. She hadn't told many people about the correspondence. It had started through her cousin Margaret's husband, who knew a man who'd served with Nathan in the cavalry. And the whole thing had felt slightly absurd at first, the idea of writing letters to a stranger across the continent. But Nathan's first letter had surprised her. It wasn't what she'd expected from a frontier rancher. He wrote carefully, with long sentences and unexpected observations about the landscape, about the particular way the Arizona light changed in the late afternoon and how it made the distant ridgelines look like they'd been cut from copper. He wrote about his daughter Clara, who was 6 and had recently decided that boots were optional and dirt was not. He wrote about his brother Cole, carefully, with a restraint that told Evelyn more than the words themselves did. By the 4th letter, she was writing back without hesitation. By the 8th, she was staying up past midnight to finish her replies. The 14th letter had asked her to come west. She stood on the platform now and looked at the people moving around her. A man with a crate of chickens, 2 women in traveling clothes who seemed to know exactly where they were going, a station master with a clipboard who did not look up. The air smelled like dust and metal and something that might have been juniper from far away. It was nothing like Philadelphia. It was nothing like anything she knew. Nobody was waiting for her. She gave it 20 minutes. She stood with her trunk beside her and watched the platform empty out, and she told herself there was a reasonable explanation. Distances were long out here. A horse could throw a shoe. A man could miscalculate the arrival time. She had come 11 days across the country, and she was not going to panic on a train platform in Arizona because her intended was 20 minutes late. She waited 40 more minutes after that. Then she picked up her trunk. It was heavier than it should have been for 2 dresses and a book, because she had also packed every one of Nathan's letters, tied with string. And she walked into the station to find someone who could tell her how to reach the Cross Ranch. The station master's name was Howell. He was a man of about 50 with the particular exhaustion of someone who has answered the same questions for 20 years. And when Evelyn approached him, he looked at her the way men in small frontier towns often looked at women who arrived alone. Not unkindly, but with a wariness that suggested he'd seen this situation before, and it rarely ended simply. "Cross Ranch," he said. "You mean Cole Cross?" "Nathan Cross," Evelyn said. "I have a letter of introduction." Something shifted in Howell's face. It was small, a tightening around the eyes, a slight adjustment of his posture. But Evelyn had been a school teacher's daughter long enough to read a room, and she felt the shift before she understood it. "Ma'am," Howell said, "when did you last receive correspondence from Mr. Nathan Cross?" "His most recent letter arrived in March," she said. "I left Philadelphia in April." Howell was quiet for a moment. He set his clipboard down on the counter. "Nathan Cross passed away in October of last year," he said. "Scouting mission went wrong up near the Dragoon Mountains. I'm sorry. I thought you might have known." She didn't say anything. She heard the words. She heard them clearly, in order, and understood what they meant. But there was a delay between understanding and feeling, like watching lightning and waiting for the thunder. And in that delay, she stood very still and looked at a point somewhere past Howell's left shoulder and did not permit herself to fall apart on the counter of the Denton station. "I see," she said finally. "Is there someone I can wire for you? Someone back east?" "No," she said. "Thank you." She picked up her trunk again and walked outside and sat down on a wooden bench at the edge of the platform and looked at the long, flat road that stretched out from the station into the Arizona distance. And she thought about 11 days on a train and 14 letters tied with string and a man she had never met who had asked her to come and build a life with him and who had been dead for 6 months before she'd ever stepped aboard. She didn't cry. She was too tired and too stunned and perhaps too stubborn. She sat on the bench and she breathed, and after a while she became aware that someone was watching her. The child was small, maybe 7, 8 at most, with dark hair coming loose from a braid and boots that had seen considerable argument with mud. She was standing about 10 feet away with the focused attention of a person who has decided to watch something and is not yet sure whether to be polite about it. "You have a lot of bags," the girl said. "Just the one trunk," Evelyn said. "It's big." "It is." The girl took 2 steps closer. She had serious eyes, the kind of serious that children sometimes have when they've been around too much adult grief, and it's marked them in a way they can't articulate. "Are you lost?" she asked. "I'm not sure," Evelyn said honestly. "I'm Clara," the girl said. "Clara Cross. My Uncle Cole sent me to wait for the train. He said maybe a lady would get off who needed help finding our ranch." She paused. "Are you a lady who needs help finding our ranch?" Evelyn looked at her for a long moment. Clara Cross, Nathan's daughter. 6 in his letters, which meant she was 7 now, maybe closer to 8. The letters had come to a stop in October, and it was May. "Your father was Nathan Cross," Evelyn said. Clara's expression didn't collapse. It just went careful. "He died," she said, "last fall." "I know," Evelyn said. "I'm sorry." Clara absorbed this with the matter-of-fact quality of a child who has had to absorb a great deal. "Mama died before that," she said, 2 years ago. "So it's just me and Uncle Cole now." She cocked her head. "Did you know my papa?" "We wrote letters to each other," Evelyn said. "I never met him in person." Clara seemed to turn this over. "Mama said letters are how you know if someone has a good heart," she said, "because you can't see their face, so you have to just say what you mean." Evelyn looked down at the trunk that held 14 letters tied with string. "Your mother was wise," she said. "She was sick for a long time before she died," Clara said, with the same factual composure. "She told me that when she got to heaven, she was going to send me someone good. She said I'd know because they'd look like they needed help as much as me." She studied Evelyn with those serious eyes. "You look like you need help." There was nothing to say to that. "I suppose I do," Evelyn said. Clara picked up one end of the trunk with both hands. She was not strong enough to lift it, but the gesture was sincere. "You can come to the ranch," she said. "Uncle Cole won't mind. He doesn't say much, but he's not mean." Evelyn stood up. She took the other end of the trunk, and the two of them managed it together, awkwardly, down the steps of the platform and into the road where a wagon was waiting with a patient horse and a driver who did not appear to be Cole Cross. Just a hired man who nodded at Evelyn without particular surprise and helped load the trunk into the back. She didn't know why she got in. She told herself it was practical. She had no money for a hotel, and the next eastbound train was not until Thursday, and she had to be somewhere for 2 days. She told herself it was only one night. She was not a foolish woman. She understood that following a child to a ranch belonging to a dead man's brother was not a sound plan. She got in the wagon anyway. The drive to the Cross Ranch took just over an hour on roads that justified the word loosely. Evelyn sat in the back of the wagon with Clara beside her, and Clara talked in the intermittent way of children, concentrated bursts of information followed by silences so complete they seemed intentional. She told Evelyn that their ranch had 23 horses and that she had named 7 of them, and Uncle Cole had only named 1, which she thought was sad. She told Evelyn that the barn smelled like hay and iron and that she liked it better than the house. She told Evelyn that Uncle Cole burned things on the stove because he wasn't paying attention and she'd gotten used to scraped off parts. Evelyn listened to all of it and looked at the Arizona landscape moving past. She couldn't help looking at the landscape, even though the afternoon light was doing something violent and beautiful to the ridgelines in the distance, and she wasn't sure she was ready to be moved by anything yet. The copper light. Nathan had written about that. When they came over a low rise and she saw the ranch for the first time, it was smaller than she'd imagined. The main house was solid but plain, wood gone gray from sun and weather, a covered porch that needed attention on one post, a vegetable garden to one side that was fighting bravely against the dryness. The barn beyond was in better shape than the house, which told her something about priorities. A water trough, a fence line running out toward the open range, horses moving in the distance. It looked like a place that had been held together through stubbornness rather than ease. Cole Cross was coming out of the barn when the wagon pulled up. He was not what she'd expected, though she wasn't sure what she'd expected. Nathan's letters had described his brother carefully, reliable and private and hard to know, and once, in a way that suggested both frustration and deep affection, the kind of man who would rather fix the fence than tell you the fence was broken. He was tall, broader through the shoulders than Nathan had been in the one photograph she'd seen, with a face that had been weathered into something that looked less like age and more like pressure. The particular look of a man who has carried too much for too long and has stopped noticing the weight because he can't put it down. He stopped when he saw her, not rudely, just stopped. The way you stop when something doesn't fit the picture you had in your head and you need a moment to adjust. Clara jumped down from the wagon before it had fully stopped moving. "Uncle Cole, this is the lady from the train. She wrote letters to Papa." Cole Cross looked at his niece and then back at Evelyn. His expression was careful, not cold, but closed. The expression of a man who has learned that open costs you. "Miss," he started. "Carter," Evelyn said. "Evelyn Carter, from Philadelphia." She climbed down from the wagon without waiting for help. The trunk she left for the driver. "I understand this is an imposition. I'm aware of the situation. I only need to stay until Thursday, and I'll be out of your way." Cole looked at her for a moment. He had Nathan's eyes, that same quality of attention, the sense of someone actually considering what you'd said rather than just waiting for you to finish. "Mr. Howell at the station told you," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." He nodded slowly. He looked at Clara, who was watching both of them with the focused energy of a child who senses something important is happening and does not want to be sent inside. "There's a spare room off the kitchen," Cole said finally. "It's not much. I don't need much." "Thursday," he said. "Thursday," she confirmed. She would be wrong about Thursday. She would be wrong by several months, but she didn't know that yet, and Cole Cross didn't know it either, and Clara knew only that the lady from the train had arrived with one big trunk and serious eyes, and something about that felt like an answer to a question she'd stopped letting herself ask. The spare room was exactly what Cole had promised. Not much. A narrow bed with a rope frame and a mattress that had seen better decades. A window that looked out onto the side yard where a broken wagon wheel had been leaning against the fence post long enough to become a fixture. A hook on the back of the door. A washstand with a basin that had a hairline crack along one side. The rug on the floor was braided, faded, and had been repaired in at least 3 places with thread that didn't quite match. Evelyn set her trunk at the foot of the bed and sat down and looked at the room. She had imagined, in the long days on the train, what Nathan's home might look like. She'd built it in her mind the way you build things from letters, assembled from details and implications, from the way he described the afternoon light and Clara's boots and the silence of the early mornings before the horses needed tending. She hadn't imagined luxury. She'd imagined purpose, a place with a shape to it. This room had the shape of something that had been set aside. She opened her trunk and took out the letters. She set them on the bed beside her and looked at them. 14, tied with string, the paper gone soft at the folds. She thought about the man who had written them. Nathan Cross, who had ridden into the Dragoon Mountains on a scouting mission in October and not come back. Nathan Cross, who had written her the 14th letter and asked her to come west, and who had been dead for 3 weeks before she'd ever read the words. She understood now what had happened, or most of it. The letters had continued to arrive in Philadelphia after his death, because the Postal Service was not a system that stopped for grief, and the last one, the one with the proposal, must have been written and sent before he left on the mission that killed him. He couldn't have known. He'd asked her to come, and he'd been dead before she'd said yes. What she didn't yet understand was who had kept writing to her after October, because there had been letters after October. 2 of them, brief, different in tone, less detailed, but still signed with Nathan's name. She had thought the difference in tone was winter, was grief, was some shift in his circumstances that he wasn't ready to explain. She had not thought dead man. She picked up the last 2 letters and looked at them again in the fading light from the window. The handwriting was slightly different. She could see it now that she was looking for it. Similar, but not the same. The slant was different. The word "the" was formed differently. Small things she hadn't noticed because she hadn't been looking. Someone had continued writing to her after Nathan died. She sat with that for a long time. At supper, Cole Cross put food on the table without ceremony. Beans, salt pork, cornbread that was more successful than the beans, and they ate in a silence that was not quite comfortable but was not hostile either. Clara sat between them and filled the quiet with observations about the horses and a question about whether a person could teach a horse to count, which Cole answered with a brevity that suggested he'd been asked this before and had not changed his position. Evelyn watched Cole across the table. He ate efficiently, without apparent pleasure, in the way of a man who has forgotten that food can be an occasion. He didn't look at her much. When he did, it was the look of someone measuring something he hadn't decided how to categorize yet. After Clara was sent to wash up, Evelyn set the 2 letters on the table between them. Cole looked at them. He didn't touch them. "These arrived after October," she said, "after Nathan died." The muscle in Cole's jaw moved. He picked up the first letter and looked at it for a moment, and she watched something cross his face. Not guilt exactly, but close to it. More like pain that had been waiting for someone to name it. "I didn't know about the proposal," he said. "I want you to understand that." "Tell me what happened," Evelyn said. He set the letter down. He looked at the table for a moment. Then he started talking. Nathan, it turned out, had told Cole about the correspondence. Had talked about Evelyn in the way he rarely talked about anything personal, with careful enthusiasm, the kind you hold back when you're not sure you have the right to it yet. Cole had known there was a woman in Philadelphia. He hadn't known Nathan had proposed. He hadn't known what the 14th letter said. When Nathan didn't come back from the Dragoon Mountains, Cole had been the one to go through his things. He'd found the ongoing correspondence, the copies Nathan kept of his own letters, Evelyn's replies going back months. He'd found her address. And he had, in his grief and his panic about what Nathan had set in motion without telling him, written 2 letters trying to bridge the gap. Not to deceive, but because he didn't know what Nathan had said, and he didn't want to simply go silent and leave a woman wondering. "I should have told you the truth in those letters," Cole said. "I know that." "Why didn't you?" He looked up. "Because I didn't know what Nathan had promised you," he said, "and I didn't want to take something away from a woman I'd never met before I understood what I was taking." Evelyn looked at him for a moment. It was, she thought, a complicated reason that was also, she suspected, an honest one. "You wrote well enough that I didn't realize it wasn't him," she said. "I know his rhythms," Cole said. "We grew up in the same house." He paused. "That's not an excuse." "No," she agreed. "It's not." They sat with that. "I don't have money to send you back to Philadelphia," he said, finally. "I want to be straight with you about that. I have a loan due at the end of summer, and I've got everything tied up in the herd and the property. I can't—" He stopped, started again. "You can stay until Thursday. I'll figure out the train fare by then." Evelyn looked at the 2 letters on the table. She thought about Philadelphia, her father's house, which had been sold after he died, the teaching position she'd given up to make this trip, the cousin Margaret who had started this whole chain of events, and who would be very sorry about it, very sincerely sorry, in the way that is not useful. "How bad is the loan?" she asked. Cole looked at her. "That's not your concern." You can't send me back to Philadelphia, she said. You just told me that, which means I'm here at least through the summer whether either of us intended it, which means it is actually my concern. She met his eyes across the table. How bad is the loan? A long silence. Outside, the last of the light was going, and somewhere in the distance, one of the horses was moving. Bad enough, Cole said. Evelyn looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at the letters, and the cracked basin in the spare room flashed through her mind, and the fence post on the porch that needed attention, and the vegetable garden fighting against the dryness, and the supper that had been efficient rather than good. She thought about Nathan Cross, who had written 14 letters about this land and the copper light, and a daughter who had decided dirt was not optional, who had asked her to come west, who had been dead before she'd read his last words. She thought, he left her something after all, just not what he intended. I can read accounts, she said, and I can teach. If you'll let me be useful until I have some way back, I won't cost you anything while I'm here. Cole Cross looked at her with those careful eyes. He didn't say yes right away. He sat with it for a moment. The way she was learning, he sat with most things. Not because he was slow, but because he understood that some decisions deserved the weight of a moment before they were made. Thursday still stands, he said finally. She understood what he meant. Thursday as a door that didn't close. Thursday as a direction she could still leave in if she needed to. Understood, she said. Clara reappeared in the doorway with her hands almost clean and her braid fully undone. She looked at the letters on the table and then at the two adults who had clearly been having a conversation she hadn't been part of, and she assessed the atmosphere with the precision of a child who had been reading adult rooms since she was old enough to understand that rooms had atmospheres. Is she staying? Clara asked Cole. For now, Cole said. Clara nodded in a satisfied way as if this confirmed something she'd already decided. She pulled out her chair and sat back down. I'll show you where the good berries grow tomorrow, she told Evelyn, before Uncle Cole burns breakfast. Cole said with the flatness of a man who had stopped arguing this point. I don't always burn breakfast. Tuesday, Clara said. That was one time. Last Tuesday, Clara said. Evelyn looked at the child across the table and felt something shift in her chest that she didn't have a name for. Not quite hope, not quite grief, something in the territory between them. She picked up her fork. She ate the rest of her beans without tasting them, and she listened to Clara explain the finer points of berry finding to a man who was listening with the closed face of someone who was actually, underneath it, paying full attention. She told herself it was only until Thursday. Outside, the Arizona night came down hard and full of stars, the way it does in country where there's nothing between you and the sky. And somewhere on the edge of town, in an office that smelled of tobacco and financial documents, Silas Mercer was adding a column of figures and smiling at the sum. He had done this before. He knew exactly how it went. A man falls behind on a loan, the interest compounds, the summer comes and the cattle prices disappoint, and by autumn the man has a choice between the ranch and his pride, and Mercer has learned that pride almost never wins. He didn't know about Evelyn Carter yet. He didn't know about the letters in her trunk, or the way she'd looked at the account books Cole kept in the desk by the window, or the quiet way she'd calculated, between one forkful of beans and the next, exactly what it would take to make this ranch survive the summer. He didn't know about her at all. He would. The night settled over the Cross Ranch, and in the spare room off the kitchen, Evelyn Carter lay on the rope-frame bed with the cracked basin light coming through the curtainless window and the letters stacked on the floor beside her, and she looked at the ceiling and thought about all the things she hadn't planned for. She had planned to arrive and meet a man who was alive. She had planned a practical partnership that might, with time, become something warmer. She had planned to have a place to belong. She hadn't planned for a dead man's letters or a brother's guilt, or a small, serious child who talked about her mother with the quiet, matter-of-fact grief of someone who has learned to live alongside loss without being swallowed by it. She hadn't planned for any of this. She put her hand on the stack of letters in the dark. 14 letters. A man she'd never met, who'd written about copper light and a daughter's boots and the silence of early mornings, who'd asked her to come west and then died before she could answer. What did you owe the dead? She lay there for a long time with that question and didn't find an answer. Outside, the horses moved in the dark. The stars did what stars in Arizona do, which is more than they do anywhere else. They filled the whole sky, extravagant and indifferent, the way the world is when it isn't watching you. She closed her eyes. Thursday was 4 days away. She was already pretty sure she wasn't leaving on Thursday. Thursday came and went without anyone mentioning it. Evelyn noticed. She was fairly certain Cole noticed too. But Clara had woken her before dawn that Thursday morning to show her where the good berries grew, a tangle of wild currants along the dry creek bed about a quarter-mile east of the house. And by the time they'd come back with their aprons stained and Clara talking without pause about the difference between the taste of early currants and late ones, the morning had moved on without leaving room for the conversation about train fare and departures that neither of them had apparently been ready to have. She stayed. She didn't announce it. Cole didn't acknowledge it. They both simply continued behaving as though the Thursday deadline had been a suggestion rather than a boundary, and the next day came, and the one after that, and by the second week Evelyn had moved the account books from the desk by the window to the kitchen table where the light was better and had spent 3 evenings working through them with a pencil and a mounting sense of something that was not quite alarm but was headed in that direction. The books were a mess. Not because Cole was careless. She could see, actually, that he wasn't. The entries were made consistently, in a hand that was compressed and precise, but because the numbers themselves told a story that no amount of careful handwriting could improve. The loan from Silas Mercer had started at $412, borrowed 2 winters ago when the herd had a bad season and the roof needed replacing, and Cole had run out of options before he ran out of expenses. The interest was steep, not illegal. Evelyn had checked that first, going back to the original agreement that Cole kept in the back of the desk drawer, but steep in the way of agreements made by men who need money badly and men who have it to lend and know exactly what that imbalance is worth. By her calculation, the current balance was somewhere between $580 and $620, depending on which interpretation of the interest clause held. She didn't tell Cole the higher number right away. She told him the lower one and watched his face, and then told him the range, and he sat across the kitchen table from her in the lamplight and looked at the figures she'd written in the margin and said nothing for long enough that Clara, doing her letters at the other end of the table, looked up and then looked back down with the particular tact of a child who understands that some silences are not hers to interrupt. "When does he expect payment?" Evelyn asked. "End of August," Cole said. "It was the second week of June." "And the herd," she said. "If the summer goes well." "The summer would have to go extremely well," Cole said. He said it without drama, which was somehow worse than if he'd said it with any. "Market prices have been soft 2 years running. I can move cattle, but not at what I need per head to clear that balance. Not by August." Evelyn looked at the numbers again. She'd been a schoolteacher's daughter and then a schoolteacher herself, and she'd managed the accounts for the church parish for 4 years when the treasurer had been ill, and she knew how to read a column of figures the way other people read a face, not just the surface, but what it implied. "You have the property," she said. "The land value." "I know what he wants the land for," Cole said. "That's why I'm not going to give it to him." She looked up. Cole was looking at the table. His jaw was set in a way she recognized now. It wasn't anger exactly. It was the expression of a man who has already considered every option and is still sitting with the one that doesn't work. "There's talk," he said quietly. "Nothing confirmed. But there's been surveyors through the county and men asking questions about property lines along the southern corridor. Men who don't announce who they're asking for." He paused. "This ranch sits at the junction of 2 natural water routes. Any rail line coming through would need to account for that land." "And Mercer knows this?" Evelyn said. "Mercer knows everything that happens in Denton County before the rest of us have finished deciding whether it happened," Cole said. She set her pencil down. The silence in the kitchen had a different quality now. Not the silence of a man looking at bad numbers. The silence of a man who understands that the bad numbers are the point, that they were designed to be bad. "He made the loan knowing you'd struggle to repay it," she said. "I can't prove that." "I know you can't prove it," Evelyn said. "I'm not asking you to prove it. I'm asking if you believe it." Cole looked at her. Something moved in his face. Not surprise, but something close to the relief of a person who has been waiting for someone else to say the thing plainly. "Yes," he said. "I believe it." Clara had stopped pretending to do her letters. Cole noticed. He looked at his niece across the table and said, "Bedtime," in the tone that didn't invite negotiation, and Clara closed her primer and slid off her chair and came around the table to kiss Cole on the cheek, a routine gesture that he received without comment, the way you receive something you've stopped noticing precisely because it's become essential. And then she stopped beside Evelyn's chair and, without ceremony, kissed her on the cheek too. Evelyn went very still. Clara had already gone down the hall before either adult at the table said anything. Cole looked at the space where his niece had been. "She doesn't do that with people she doesn't trust," he said. It came out like a statement of fact, which was probably how he'd meant it, but it landed in the room as something more than that. Evelyn picked up her pencil. She looked at the figures. "I'm going to need to look at more than the accounts," she said. "I'm going to need to understand the full picture of what Mercer has been doing in this county, who else he's lent to, what terms, whether there's a pattern." She kept her voice even and practical because she was better at practical than she was at most other things. "If he's doing this to you, he's done it to others." "Probably," Cole said. "Then there may be others who'd be interested in knowing about it." Cole was quiet for a moment. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting anything yet," Evelyn said. "I'm telling you what I need to find out before I can suggest anything." She looked up. "Is there somewhere in town I could speak with people? Somewhere with records?" "The county office keeps property records," Cole said. "And there's a man named Hargrove who runs the general store. He knows everyone and he talks, which is usually a liability, but in this case might be useful." He paused. "I should tell you, Mercer has influence in this town. People are careful around him." "I'm not from this town," Evelyn said. "I don't know yet what I should be careful of. That might be useful too." Cole looked at her for a long moment. It was the look of a man deciding whether to trust something he hadn't expected to need to trust. "I'll take you in on Saturday," he said. She nodded and looked back at the books. They sat there for another half hour, working through the numbers without speaking much. And outside, the Arizona night was doing its extravagant thing with the stars again, and neither of them acknowledged what had just shifted in the room because they were both too practical and too private for that, and also because some shifts don't need acknowledging. They just need to be allowed to settle. Saturday in Denton was not a small affair. It was the day the surrounding ranches and farms sent people in for supplies, and the main street filled up with wagons and horses and the particular sociable noise of people who don't see each other often and are making the most of it. Evelyn had seen towns like this in her travels east. The social density of people who are spread thin across big country and compensate by talking a great deal when they get the chance. Cole moved through the town with the compressed, efficient quality she was coming to recognize as his default. He wasn't unfriendly, exactly, but he was economical with himself in a way that kept people at a polite distance. Men nodded at him. He nodded back. He stopped to speak with two other ranchers near the feed store about cattle prices, a conversation that was short and not optimistic. And Evelyn stood slightly back and listened and watched the faces of the men he talked to. She saw the same thing in their faces that she'd seen in the account books. Pressure. The particular flatness of men who have been managing a problem for long enough that they've stopped letting themselves think about it directly. She went to the county records office while Cole was at the feed store. The clerk was a young man named Aldridge, who was visibly surprised to see a woman walk in and ask to look at property records, and then visibly more surprised when she explained what she was looking for, and it became clear she knew exactly what she was talking about. He brought her 3 ledgers, and she sat at the counter and worked through them for 45 minutes with the focused efficiency of someone who has been looking for patterns in numbers long enough to know where they usually hide. She found 7 other properties in Denton County with loan agreements registered to a holding company called Mercer Land and Finance. 6 of them were ranches along the southern water corridor. All of them had loan terms with interest structures similar to Cole's. Not identical, but similar in the way of agreements designed by someone who has found a mechanism that works and doesn't deviate from it unnecessarily. 3 of the 6 ranches had already transferred ownership in the past 4 years. She copied down the names and dates in a small notebook she'd thought to bring. At Hargrove's general store, she found Cole examining nails with the focus of a man who takes nails seriously, and beside him a woman named Ruth Elliston, who turned out to be one of the other ranchers' wives, and who had the quality of someone who had formed an opinion about you inside of 30 seconds and was waiting to see if it was right. Ruth Elliston looked at Evelyn with direct, uncalculating eyes. "You're the woman who came in on the train for Nathan," she said. Not cruelly, just directly. "Yes," Evelyn said. "Staying on a while," Ruth said. "For now." Ruth nodded in the way of a woman who has filed this information and will do something useful with it later. "How are the books?" she asked. She said it to Cole, not Evelyn, but she was watching Evelyn when she said it. Cole looked up from the nails. "Being looked at," he said. Ruth turned back to the counter. "Frank got a letter last week," she said, "from Mercer's man, reminding him of the payment schedule. Frank burned it, which didn't help anything, but I understood the impulse." She paused. "You're not the only one, Cole, in case you'd started thinking you were." "I know," Cole said. "Knowing and doing something about it are different things." "I know that too," Cole said. Evelyn was looking at the notebook in her hand. Ruth Elliston noticed. "What's in the notebook?" Ruth asked. Evelyn looked up. "Property records," she said, "from the county office. Loan agreements registered to Mercer's company." She hesitated for only a moment. "Would your husband's loan be registered to Mercer Land and Finance?" Ruth's expression shifted. Not shock, but the particular sharpness of someone who has just been handed a piece of something they'd suspected but couldn't name. "I don't know," she said. "Frank handles the papers." "It might be worth finding out," Evelyn said. "If there are 7 properties with similar terms, and 3 of them have already changed hands, that's a pattern. Patterns are harder to dismiss than individual cases." Ruth looked at her for a moment. Then she looked at Cole. "Where did you find her?" she said. "She found us," Cole said, and went back to the nails. There was a moment, brief and not comfortable, when Evelyn turned and saw Silas Mercer across the street. She knew him immediately, which was interesting because she'd never seen him before and Cole hadn't described him. But there are certain men who carry their particular quality of authority in the way they stand and the way other people move around them. A slight adjustment, a careful distance. And Mercer had that quality in full measure. He was heavy-set, well-dressed by Denton standards, with a face that had probably been handsome once and had settled into something more useful, commanding. He was standing outside what appeared to be his own office, a building with a painted sign, and he was watching the street the way a man watches things he owns. His eyes moved to Cole, then, unhurriedly, to Evelyn. She held his gaze for exactly 1 moment before looking away. Not from discomfort, from strategy. She'd learned from her father that the most useful thing you could do when someone was trying to measure you was to give them just enough to look at and nothing more. Cole had seen the exchange. He said, without looking at her, "Come on," and moved toward the wagon. On the road back to the ranch, with the afternoon light going long and copper over the ridgelines, Evelyn told Cole what she'd found in the records. She went through it methodically. The 7 properties, the 3 already transferred, the similar loan structures, the dates. Cole listened without interrupting. His hands on the reins were steady. When she finished, there was a pause. "He looked at you," Cole said. "He did. He'll ask about you. He will. And when he finds out you came in on the train to marry Nathan," Cole paused. He didn't finish the sentence. "He'll know I have no stake here," Evelyn said. "No property, no family. He'll think that makes me less dangerous." She looked at the road ahead. "I'd like him to keep thinking that for as long as possible." Cole glanced at her. It was a quick glance, the kind that takes something in without appearing to. "You're not what I expected," he said. "What did you expect?" "I don't know," he said honestly. "Someone who needed more help than they gave." She thought about that. "I'm in your spare room because I have nowhere else to be," she said. "I don't think that makes me a woman who needs help so much as a woman who ran out of options and is making the best of what's available." "There's a difference?" "I think so," she said, "though I might be the wrong person to ask." Cola was quiet for a moment. The wagon moved over the uneven road with its characteristic complaint of wood and iron. "I haven't been able to keep this ranch going the way Nathan would have wanted," he said. It came out low, like something he hadn't entirely meant to say. "He built most of what's here. I've just been holding it. Holding it for 7 months after losing your brother isn't nothing," Evelyn said. "It's not enough." "No," she agreed, "but it's not nothing." He didn't answer. She hadn't expected him to. She was learning that Cole Cross registered things without confirming he'd registered them, the way a tree registers weather without being able to tell you what it feels about rain. When they got back to the ranch, Clara was sitting on the porch steps with her boots off. Bootlessness being, apparently, a state she returned to whenever adult supervision was at a sufficient distance. and she had a piece of string and was doing something with it that involved her fingers and considerable concentration. "Did you get the nails?" she asked Cole. "I got the nails." "Good," she said, as though this resolved something. She looked at Evelyn. "You have ink on your hand." "I do," Evelyn confirmed. "I was taking notes." Clara turned this over. "Mama used to take notes," she said. "She said if you didn't write it down, it didn't stay." "Your mother was right," Evelyn said. Clara nodded, satisfied, and went back to her string. The following week moved in a rhythm that Evelyn hadn't expected to settle into as easily as she did. She taught Clara in the mornings, reading first, which Clara was strong in and knew it, then arithmetic, which Clara was also strong in but pretended otherwise because she'd decided arithmetic was less interesting than arguing about it. In the afternoons, Evelyn worked on the accounts and the notes from the county records and the pattern she was building out of Mercer's documented activity in the county. In the evenings, Cole came in from whatever the ranch required that day. There was always something, fence or water or animals, and they ate supper with Clara and then, after Clara was in bed, sat at the kitchen table and talked. Not always about Mercer, sometimes about the ranch. Cole explaining things she asked about, and she asking because she needed to understand it all if she was going to be any use. Sometimes about Nathan. Those conversations came carefully, around the edges, the way you approach a topic when you're not sure whether approaching it helps or hurts. Cole told her about Nathan's enlistment in the cavalry, which had been against everyone's better judgment, including Nathan's own, but which Nathan had decided was necessary on grounds that Cole had never fully accepted but had eventually stopped arguing against. He told her about the way Nathan had built the barn. "He had ideas about the way wood should sit in a frame that I thought were unnecessarily complicated and turned out to be right." He told her about Clara's birth and the 2 years before her mother died when the ranch had been something different, louder, fuller, less careful. He didn't tell her these things in long recitations. He told them in pieces, the way you tell things when you're not actually trying to tell them, but they come out anyway because the person you're talking to isn't pushing, and sometimes that's when the words decide to arrive. Evelyn told him about Philadelphia, about her father's school and the way he'd run it, rigorous, meticulous, fair, in the way of someone who genuinely believed that fairness was a skill you practiced rather than a quality you either had or didn't, about the teaching position she'd taken after he died, which had been good work but lonely work in the particular way of work that puts you around people all day without giving you the chance to know any of them well. About the letters from Nathan, which had started as a strange experiment and become something she'd looked forward to in a way she didn't entirely understand until she was looking back at it. "He was good at letters," Cole said one evening. "He was," Evelyn agreed, "better than most people are at conversation." "He was good at conversation too," Cole said. "He just liked to try things out on paper first." He paused. "I'm the opposite," she'd noticed. "You think before you talk," she said. "I think a long time before I talk," he said. "Nathan used to say it was like waiting for a well to fill." "That's not a bad thing," she said. "Depends what's thirsty," he said, and went back to his coffee. She was laughing before she thought about it. A short, genuine sound, surprised out of her. And Cole looked up with an expression that was not quite a smile but was as close as she'd seen him get to one, and the lamp was burning between them on the table and outside the night was doing its thing with the stars. It was 2 weeks later that Mercer's man came to the ranch. He arrived on a Tuesday morning while Cole was out with the herd, which Evelyn suspected was not a coincidence. He was a lean, tidy man named Garrett, who introduced himself as Mr. Mercer's representative, and who had the careful pleasantness of someone whose job requires a specific kind of smile. Evelyn met him on the porch. She did not invite him in. "Mr. Cross is out," she said. "That's all right," Garrett said. "I can leave the message with you." His eyes moved over her with the assessment of a man who is calculating something. "You're the woman who came in on the train." "Evelyn Carter," she said. "Yes." "Mr. Mercer wanted Mr. Cross to know that the payment schedule remains firm," Garrett said. "End of August. And to know that Mr. Mercer is a reasonable man, and if Mr. Cross finds himself in difficulty, there are arrangements that could be made, mutually beneficial arrangements." She'd been ready for this. She'd been waiting for it, actually, and she kept her face pleasant and her voice polite and said, "I'll pass that along." Garrett smiled. "Mr. Mercer also wanted to express his welcome to you, Miss Carter. It's not easy, coming west alone. He hopes you're finding Denton County to your liking. It was smooth. It was meant to establish that Mercer knew about her, knew she was alone, knew she was here on uncertain terms. It was meant to be felt as a kind of weight, pleasant sounding, like most weights that are designed to crush you slowly. Very much, she said. It's beautiful country. Garrett nodded and tipped his hat and left. She stood on the porch and watched him ride back down the road, and when he was out of sight, she let out a breath and went inside and wrote down everything he'd said, word for word, in the notebook. When Cole came back in that evening, she told him about the visit. He listened without moving much. When she finished, he said, "Mutually beneficial arrangements." That's what he said. "He means he'll take partial ownership instead of full payment," Cole said. "Get a foothold and work from there." His jaw had that set to it again. "Not a chance." "I know," Evelyn said. He looked at her. "He sent his man when I wasn't here." "I noticed that too. He's trying to figure out what you are," Cole said. "Whether you're a resource or a liability." "I think he's decided I'm probably irrelevant," Evelyn said, "which is what I'd like him to keep thinking." "What are you doing?" Cole said, not challenging her, asking with genuine directness, the kind of question that only gets asked when someone has decided you're worth asking directly. She set the notebook on the table between them. "I'm building a record," she said. "Everything Mercer's done in this county that can be documented. The loan terms, the property transfers, the timeline of when the surveyors came through and when the collection pressure increased afterward, the names of the families who lost land and where they went." She looked at him. "If there's any legal avenue here, any way to bring this in front of someone with the authority to act on it, we need the record to exist first. You can't argue with a man like Mercer on the basis of what you know. You can only argue with what you can prove." Cole looked at the notebook, then at her. "Who taught you that?" he asked. "My father," she said. "He spent 20 years running a school in a city that didn't always want it to succeed. He used to say the most powerful thing a person can possess is a well-documented truth." Cole was quiet for a moment. Outside, the evening was coming in, and Clara was somewhere on the property, doing the things she did before supper, where she went to talk to the horses in a private and apparently serious way. "This could make things dangerous," Cole said. "For you, if Mercer figures out what you're doing before we have enough to use it." "I know," Evelyn said. "You don't have any stake here," he said. It wasn't an accusation. It was closer to the opposite. Who was giving her this door again? "You're not from this county. You don't own anything here. You could still go back east and this wouldn't follow you." She looked at him. "Clara kissed me on the cheek," she said, 2 weeks ago. "You told me she doesn't do that with people she doesn't trust." She let that sit for a moment. "I think maybe I have a stake here after all." Cole Cross looked at her for a long time. There are moments in a life when something fundamental shifts. Not dramatically, not with fanfare, but in the quiet rearrangement of how two people are oriented toward each other. Cole Cross looked at Evelyn Carter across the kitchen table, where the lamp burned and the notebook sat between them. And he said nothing, because he was a man who thought a long time before he talked, and perhaps what he was thinking about required longer than most things. But the space between them was different after that. She felt it and didn't name it, which was the right call. Some things, named too early, break. She pulled the notebook back toward her, picked up her pencil. "I want to know more about the families who lost their ranches," she said. "What happened to them, where they went, whether they have documentation of what they agreed to versus what they received." She made a note in the margin. "If any of them kept records, that changes what we have." Cole reached across the table and set his hand briefly on the edge of the notebook, not stopping her, just a steadying weight for one moment. "I know where one of them went," he said. "Harlow family. Lost their place 2 years ago. Old man Harlow is still in Denton, lives above the dry goods store." "Can you introduce me?" Evelyn asked. "Yes," Cole said. Outside, Clara came in from her conversation with the horses with mud on both boots and something in her expression that suggested the horses had said something worth considering. "Supper," she announced. Cole stood up from the table. Evelyn closed the notebook. In the back of her mind, the figure of Silas Mercer stood outside his office on a Saturday afternoon, watching the street the way a man watches things he owns. And she thought, not yet. Not yet. But the record was growing, one documented fact at a time, and facts were the most durable things she knew how to build. One entry at a time. The summer was barely half gone. Old Man Harlow lived above the dry goods store in a single room that smelled like tobacco and old paper and the particular staleness of a space that hadn't had a window opened in some time. He was 70 or close to it, with hands that had done 40 years of ranch work and now had nothing to do, which was its own kind of damage. He received Cole with the wariness of a man who had learned that visitors usually wanted something, and he received Evelyn with outright suspicion, which she didn't hold against him. Cole explained her briefly. She's helping with the accounts, she's been looking at the county records, she'd like to understand what happened with your property. And Harlow looked at Evelyn for a long moment and then looked at Cole and said, "You trust her?" "Yes," Cole said. He said it without hesitation, which Evelyn noted and filed away without examining too closely. Harlow grunted and told them to sit down. He talked for nearly 2 hours. He talked the way men do when they've been holding something too long and finally have someone asking the right questions. Not in a rush, but with a kind of grim relief, pulling up details she wouldn't have thought to ask for. The original loan amount. The date the first interest notice arrived. The specific language Mercer's man had used when he came to discuss arrangements. The morning Harlow had gone to the county office to contest the foreclosure and found that the paperwork had already been filed, that the process was already in motion, that the window he'd thought was still open had closed without anyone telling him it was closing. "Did you keep any of it?" Evelyn asked. "The letters, the notices, the original loan agreement." Harlow looked at her. Then he got up and went to the corner of the room where a trunk sat that looked like it hadn't been moved in a long time. He opened it and dug through it without elegance. She could hear paper moving, things shifting, and came back with a bundle wrapped in oilcloth that he set on the table between them. "Kept everything," he said. "Didn't know what I'd do with it. Just couldn't throw it away." She unwrapped the oilcloth carefully. Inside were letters, notices, the original agreement, a hand-drawn map of the property, with annotations in Harlow's cramped writing, and a small calendar page from 2 years prior with dates circled in pencil. She went through it systematically, the way she went through everything. Not fast, not rushing toward the interesting parts, but in order, because order was how you understood what something actually meant, rather than what you wanted it to mean. Cole sat across the table and watched her work. Harlow watched her too, with a different expression now. Less suspicion, more the look of a man who has produced something he thought was useless and is watching someone find a use for it. "The interest notice," she said, after about 15 minutes. "This one, dated March of '76. "What about it?" Harlow said. "The rate it cites is different from the rate in your original agreement," she said. "By half a point. That doesn't sound like much, but over 2 years at the balance you had—" She did the calculation in the margin of her notebook. "It accounts for roughly $60 of what you were told you owed." Harlow stared at the paper. "I didn't catch that," he said. "You weren't looking for it," she said. "Most people aren't." "Is that can he do that?" "No," she said. "Not legally. Not without your written consent to a rate adjustment, which you clearly didn't give because there's no record of it here." She looked up. "Did you sign anything after the original agreement? Any amendment or addendum?" "They gave me something to sign when they sent the first notice," Harlow said slowly. "Said it was just an acknowledgement that I'd received the notice." "Did you keep a copy?" "No." She wrote that down. "What did it look like? How long was it?" He described it. 1 page, small print at the bottom, a line for his signature and a line for the date. Evelyn wrote the description down and underlined it. "That's how he does it," she said, half to herself. "The acknowledgement receipt. It's not an acknowledgement. It's a consent document, signed under a different label, so you don't know what you're agreeing to." The room was very quiet. Cole said carefully, "Can that be proven?" "If Harlow's experience matches others, if the pattern holds across multiple borrowers, then yes," Evelyn said. "1 instance is a dispute. 7 instances with the same mechanism is evidence of intent." She looked at Harlow. "Would you be willing to make a statement, formal, written, about what you received and what you signed?" Harlow was quiet for a long moment. He looked at his hands on the table, those big worked-out hands with nothing left to do. "Won't bring my ranch back," he said. "No," she said honestly, "it won't. But it might stop him doing it to someone else. It might." Harlow looked out the window, the one he apparently never opened, at the street below where the Saturday crowd was moving and making noise and living their lives in the sun. "All right," he said, Write what you need written. I'll sign it. She copied out a statement in clear, plain language. No legal flourishes, because she wasn't a lawyer and didn't pretend to be, but precise, factual, dated, and read it back to him line by line before he signed. Cole witnessed it. She dated her notebook entry to match. Walking back down the stairs to the street, she felt Cole's hand briefly at her elbow as they navigated the narrow staircase. And he said nothing about it, and she said nothing about it. And when they came out into the afternoon light, he said, "Elliston will sign one too. I'd bet on it." "I think so," she said. "And if we can find the others, the Murphys, the Calhouns, if any of them kept their paperwork." "The Calhouns went to Tucson," Cole said. "But the Murphys are still in the county, east of us, near the ridge. I can ride out there." She looked at her notebook. 3 documented properties, 1 formal statement. It wasn't enough yet, but it was more than she'd had a week ago, and more was always better than less when you were building something that had to hold weight. They were 2 weeks from August when Mercer made his first real move. She smelled the smoke before she heard anything, a sharp, wrong smell that pulled her out of a half-sleep sometime after midnight, and she lay still for one confused moment before her mind caught up with what her senses were already telling her. And she was out of bed before she'd finished thinking about it. The barn was burning, not fully, not yet, but the east corner of the roof had caught, and the fire was doing what fire does in dry country in the dry season, which was move with a purpose that felt personal. She was out the back door and across the yard in her bare feet before she registered that the ground was cold, or that she'd left her shoes, or that she was wearing her nightgown. And she heard Cole already. He'd gotten out ahead of her, was already at the barn doors, and she could hear the horses inside in a way that made her stomach drop. Panicked horses in a burning barn are a specific and terrible sound. It's not like any other animal distress. It's high and rhythmic and urgent in a way that bypasses thought and goes straight to the body. "The doors," Cole shouted at her, and she understood. He was going in, and she needed to open the far doors so the horses had somewhere to go. She ran around the side of the barn. The smoke was thicker there, pouring from under the eaves, and she got the side doors open with both hands. The latch was stiff. It had always been stiff. Cole had meant to fix it, and for one terrible second it held, and she pulled with everything she had, and it gave, and the doors swung out, and 2 horses came through immediately, nearly knocking her down, and she pressed herself against the doorframe and let them go. Inside, she could hear Cole's voice, low, deliberate. The tone you use with frightened animals that is not calm exactly, but is controlled, is anchored, gives them something to follow. And the sound of hooves on packed earth and the increasing, pressing, intimate heat of the fire above. She counted, 7 horses out. There were, she had to think, she'd learned the number by now, 11 horses total. Cole had 9 stalls plus 2 in the paddock overnight. She went in. The smoke inside was not like smoke outdoors. It had weight and direction, and it pressed against the eyes and throat with a specificity that felt like intent. She could see almost nothing. She followed the sound of Cole's voice and found him in the far stall with the last 2 horses, both refusing to move, pressed into the corner the way panicked animals press. And she went to the nearer one and got her hands on its halter and pulled with her body weight and talked to it the way she'd heard Cole talk, in that low, deliberate register. And the horse came, lurching and sidling, but came, and she walked it backward through the smoke toward the doors. She got it out. She went back in. Cole was already bringing the last one. It had taken both of them to break its panic, and it was still pulling against the lead but moving. And Evelyn got to the other side, and between them, they walked it out into the cold night air, and she felt the clean air on her face like something she'd forgotten existed. Cole let go of the lead rope and stood with his hands on his knees for a moment, coughing. She stood next to him and did the same. The barn was burning properly now. The east wall had caught, and the fire lit the yard orange and wrong, and the horses they'd gotten out were scattered across the paddock and the open ground beyond, which was going to be a problem to deal with, and the well was 30 yards away, and she already knew that even if they'd had a full bucket line, they couldn't save the barn at this point. "Clara," she said. "I got her out before you woke up," Cole said. "She's at the Reindorf place. I sent her with their boy when he came to help with the bucket line." He straightened up. He was looking at the barn. In the firelight, his face was the face of a man calculating loss in real time and not letting himself feel it yet. "I got all 11 horses out?" "Yes," she said. "All 11. He nodded. She became aware that she was standing in her nightgown in the middle of the yard with no shoes, and her feet were dirty and cold, and her eyes were burning, and she had, at some point during the last 20 minutes, completely stopped caring about any of that. The Raindor family was there. She could see them now, forming the bucket line that was doing what it could, which was not enough to save the barn but might be enough to keep the fire from the house. Two other families had appeared from somewhere, the Sanderson Ranch and the Elliston place, Ruth Elliston's husband Frank among them, working the line without being asked, without ceremony, the way frontier people show up because they understand that fire doesn't stop at property lines. Ruth herself materialized beside Evelyn at some point during the next hour and said, "Here," and handed her a pair of boots that were slightly too large, and Evelyn put them on without comment. "You're bleeding," Ruth said, looking at her right hand. Evelyn looked down. She'd cut her palm on the barn latch, the stiff one, the one that had held. She hadn't felt it. "It's not bad," she said. "I know it's not bad," Ruth said. "I said you're bleeding, not that you're dying." She produced a strip of cloth from somewhere and wrapped Evelyn's hand with the efficiency of a woman who has dealt with this kind of thing before and regards drama about it as a waste of time. By the time the fire burned down to something they could control, it was almost 3 in the morning. The east wall of the barn was gone and most of the roof. The west wall was standing. The horses were scattered but alive. The house was untouched. Cole stood at the edge of the ruin and looked at it, and the neighbors who had come stood with him in the particular silence of people who understand that a man needs a moment to look at what he's lost before he can talk about what comes next. Frank Elliston came to stand beside Cole. He was a square, weathered man who looked like he'd been made from the same material as the country he lived in. "This wasn't an accident," he said. It wasn't a question. "No," Cole said. Frank was quiet for a moment. "You got proof?" "Not yet," Cole said. Frank looked at Evelyn. She'd moved to stand near Cole without consciously deciding to. "The woman who's been asking questions at the county office," Frank said. "Ruth told me." "She's been careful," Cole said. "She should be more careful," Frank said. Mercer knows someone's been pulling records. Aldridge at the county office isn't exactly... He talks. Evelyn absorbed this. It meant they had less time than she'd thought. "How much does Mercer know?" she asked. "I don't know what he knows," Frank said. "I know he's the kind of man who acts when he thinks someone might be a problem. Tonight," he looked at the ruined barn. "Tonight's a message." She looked at Cole. In the orange-faded light of the dying fire, he was looking at the western wall that was still standing, the one Nathan had apparently had ideas about in terms of how wood should sit in a frame. Something moved in his face. Not grief exactly, but grief adjacent, the kind of feeling that attaches itself to a structure when the structure is connected to a person you've lost. "I'm not leaving," he said. Not to Frank, not even to Evelyn. He said it to the barn. "Nobody said you were," Frank told him. Ruth came up on Evelyn's other side. She looked at the ruin, and then she looked at Evelyn and said, in a low voice, "You have enough yet? In the notebook?" "Not yet," Evelyn said. "I need more time." "You may not have as much as you thought," Ruth said. "I know." They stood there together in the middle of the ruined night, and the horses moved restlessly in the dark at the edge of the firelight, and around them the neighbors who had come without being asked began the quiet work of cleaning up what could be cleaned up tonight, which was not much, but they did it anyway because that was the only thing there was to do. She didn't sleep again that night. She went back inside and sat at the kitchen table with her notebook and her copies of Harlow's papers and the notes from the county records and the statement Harlow had signed, and she worked through what she had and what she still needed with the particular focus of someone who has been frightened and has decided that the productive response to fear is work. She was still sitting there when the sky outside the window went from black to gray to the particular luminous quality of early Arizona morning, and she heard Cole come in through the back door. He'd been out through the rest of the night, checking on the horses, assessing the damage, doing the practical things that needed doing. And he stopped when he saw her at the table. "You should sleep," he said. "Later," she said. He poured water from the pitcher into a cup and set it in front of her, and then sat down across the table with one of his own. He looked at the papers spread across the table. He looked at her hand, which Ruth had wrapped, but which was beginning to make itself felt now that the adrenaline had finished doing whatever adrenaline does. "You went back in," he said. The barn. You were already in there. You didn't have to go back in. She looked at him. You couldn't get both horses out by yourself, she said. He looked at the table for a moment. He was still covered in smoke and ash, they both were, and he had the look of a man who has passed through something and is still deciding what it means. The fire was set from the east corner, he said. I found the origin point, lamp oil on the outside of the wall. Nobody does that by accident. No, she agreed. He's telling me he can take more than the loan, Cole said. He's telling me it doesn't have to be legal. He doesn't have to wait for August. She looked at her notebook, at the statement Harlow had signed, at the pattern of dates and names and loan terms she'd been building, one careful entry at a time. It means we're closer than he's comfortable with, she said. Cole looked at her. Why do you say that? He asked. Because a man who's confident doesn't send a warning, she said. A man who's confident waits. He sent a warning because something made him nervous, which means something we're doing is working. She turned the notebook so he could see the entry she'd made last night before the fire about the consent document that Harlow had described. If the other families have the same thing, if the Murphys and the Calhouns can identify the same mechanism in their own agreements, then we have a case for fraud. Not just for your debt, for all of it, for every ranch he's taken. Cole studied the entry. You need the Murphys, he said. Yes. I'll ride out there tomorrow, he said. Today I need to assess the barn and figure out what's salvageable. He paused. And I need to tell Clara. Is she old enough to understand what's happening? Evelyn asked. She's old enough to understand that someone burned our barn on purpose, Cole said. She needs to hear it from me, not find out sideways. He looked at his cup. She's also going to be furious. She named 4 of those horses. Despite everything, Evelyn felt something move through her that wasn't quite a smile, but was in its neighborhood. Cole rode out to the Murphy place the following afternoon, and Evelyn spent the morning doing what could be done with what was left of the barn, which was not much in terms of the structure itself, but the equipment stored in the west section was largely intact and needed to be moved before the standing wall decided to stop standing, and she did this with the help of the Rheindorf boy who'd stayed over and who turned out to be useful and quiet, 2 qualities she appreciated in equal measure. She was carrying a saddle across the yard when she saw the rider coming up the road from the south. He was old, not fragile, but genuinely old, with the deliberate way of moving that belonged to a body that had put in its time and was now spending its reserves carefully. He rode a mule, not a horse, and he had a saddlebag that sat heavy on the animal's left side. He came to the gate and stopped and looked at the ruined barn, and then at Evelyn with the particular expression of someone who has seen worse, but is not pretending this isn't bad. This the Cross Ranch? He asked. Yes, she said. I'm looking for the family of Nathan Cross, he said. I'm a week later than I meant to be. Old men don't move as fast as they used to. He reached into the breast pocket of his coat and produced an envelope. My name is Aldous Webb. I'm a merchant out of California. Nathan Cross did business with me. He prepaid for a delivery of goods, long while back. Goods I finally got around to delivering to the Tucson warehouse last month. He held out the envelope. And I've got something else for the family. Been carrying it since October. She set down the saddle and came to the gate and took the envelope. It was addressed in a hand she didn't recognize, not Nathan's, but close, to Cole Cross, care of the ranch. The return address was a legal office in Tucson. She looked at it and looked at the old man. What is this? She asked. Letter from the Army, Webb said. Nathan's commanding officer sent it to me to deliver because he knew I was heading east. I was traveling slow, like I said. He reached into the saddlebag. And this. He produced a small leather journal, worn at the corners and stained along one edge, that had the look of something that had been carried in a coat pocket for a long time and had accumulated all the evidence of that proximity. Nathan gave it to me last summer, Webb said. Said if anything happened to him, I should get it to his brother. Said I'd know when to bring it. He looked at the ruined barn again. I'd say this qualifies as when. She held the journal carefully. It was heavier than it looked, or maybe that was her knowing what it contained before she'd opened it. The way certain objects have a gravity that precedes your understanding of them. You've read it? She asked. No, ma'am, Webb said. He told me not to, and I didn't. I'm an old man who keeps his word, which is about the only thing I've got left that's worth keeping. He climbed down from the mule with the careful economy of someone negotiating with his own joints. I could do with some water if you have it. And I'd like to pay my respects to Nathan's family, if they're about. Cole is out, she said, but come in. She gave Webb water and bread and sat him in the kitchen while she set the journal and the envelope on the table and looked at them. The Reindorf boy had come to the doorway, and she sent him back to the yard with a look that communicated without ambiguity that she needed the room. She didn't open the journal. It was for Cole. She opened the envelope. It was what Webb had said, a letter from a captain in Nathan's unit, formal and brief in the way of official military correspondence, addressed to Cole. It conveyed condolences. It described, in sparse language, the nature of the scouting mission and the circumstances of Nathan's death. And at the end, it mentioned that Captain Harlan had forwarded a separate communication from Nathan himself, written before the mission, to be delivered in the event of his death, through a civilian contact named Webb who had agreed to carry it. She set the letter down. Webb was drinking his water and looking out the window at the ruin of the barn with the equanimity of a man who has seen enough of the world to have developed a functional relationship with its capacity for destruction. He knew it might happen, Evelyn said. Not quite a question. He was going into the Dragoon Mountains with 6 men looking for a supply route, Webb said. He wasn't stupid. He paused. He was a careful man. He didn't leave things undone if he could help it. She thought about 14 letters, about the copper light and Clara's boots, and the particular way Nathan had of building towards something across multiple pages without quite naming it until he was ready. She thought about the journal sitting on the table. Cole came back in the late afternoon, and the Murphy family had given him what she'd hoped, their own bundle of correspondence, their own version of the consent document, 2 years' worth of letters from Mercer's company that corroborated everything Harlow had described. He came in the door with the bundle under his arm and stopped when he saw the old man at the table and the objects beside the lamp. Webb introduced himself. Cole shook his hand and received the condolences with the compressed courtesy of a man who has had a lot of practice accepting condolences and has never gotten comfortable with it. Then Webb left, climbing back onto his mule with his joints cooperating minimally, and Evelyn watched Cole look at the journal on the table. She told him what it was. She told him about the letter from the captain. She set both in front of him and went to the other side of the kitchen and started doing something with the supper things, because she understood that what happened next needed to happen without an audience. She heard him open the journal. She didn't hear anything else for a long time. The supper things kept her hands busy. Outside the window, the evening came in and the sky did what it always did out here. Went copper, then amber, then the color that Nathan had described in his letters as something close to the moment just before everything either gets better or it doesn't. After a while, Cole said, "Evelyn." She turned around. He was sitting with the journal open in front of him. His face was the face of a man who has just been hit by something he knew was coming and had still not managed to be ready for. But under that, something else. His eyes had the quality of a man who has just been given a piece of information that changes the shape of everything. He turned the journal around so she could see the page it was open to. She came to the table and read. Nathan's handwriting filled the page in the same careful, compressed script she knew from his letters, but the content was nothing like his letters. Dates, names, transactions, property records copied by hand, a diagram of the Southern Water Corridor with the properties marked and the projected rail line sketched in pencil alongside Mercer's land holdings as they stood and as they would stand once the ranches were cleared. Dollar figures, the names of two county officials whose cooperation had apparently been purchased. A description of the consent document mechanism. Nathan had called it exactly that, in those words, with a specific example documented from a rancher named Calhoun, who Nathan had known and who had apparently told him what had happened before the Calhouns left for Tucson. Nathan Cross had known about Mercer, had been documenting him. Quietly, methodically, in a small leather journal he'd entrusted to an old merchant from California, all through the last summer of his life. He was doing what you've been doing, Cole said. He just didn't get to finish it. She sat down. She looked at the journal and at her own notebook side by side on the table. Nathan's documentation and hers, a year apart, built from different angles but toward the same shape. He left us the key, she said quietly. Cole looked at her. What? He didn't know who'd need it, she said. He just knew someone would. So he built it carefully, and he left it with someone he trusted, and he thought ahead. She touched the edge of the journal, just the edge. He thought about the people who would come after. She was thinking about 14 letters, about a man who built things, barns, correspondences, documentation of crimes, with the same care, because he understood that what you built was what survived you. Cole was very still. After a moment he said, "Between your record and his, is it enough?" She looked at both notebooks. She thought about Harlow's signed statement, about the Murphy papers under Cole's arm, about the Calhoun example documented in Nathan's own hand, about the consent document mechanism, described by 3 separate parties from 3 separate experiences. "B," she said. "I don't know yet. I need to sit with all of it." She looked at him. "But it's close. And if we can get the Calhouns to confirm what Nathan documented about them." "Tucson is 2 days' ride," Cole said. "I know. And we have less than 3 weeks until August." "I know." He looked at the window. The last of the copper light was going. "The barn is gone," he said. Not in grief, or not only in grief, more like a man accounting for resources. Building materials, time, it all costs, and I don't have... He stopped. "I don't see how I get to August with enough left to pay him." She looked at the notebooks, at Nathan's journal, at the Murphy papers, and the Harlow statement. "You might not have to pay him in cash," she said slowly. Cole looked at her. "If we have enough to take to a territorial judge," she said, "if what we have constitutes documented fraud, and I think it does, or it's close, then what Mercer holds over you may not be legally enforceable. Or at minimum, there may be grounds to challenge it." She paused. "But we need the right person to bring it to. Someone with the authority to hear it and the interest to act. Not a local sheriff that Mercer's already got connections with. There's a federal marshal who comes through Tucson," Cole said carefully. Nathan knew him. They served in the same unit before Nathan mustered out. He said the last part with a particular flatness that told her he was thinking about Nathan serving and Nathan not coming back from the mountains and the chain of events that had led to this kitchen and this evening. "I don't know if he'd... It would depend on what we have." "Then we need to know if what we have is enough," Evelyn said. "And we need someone who can tell us. A lawyer." "In Tucson," Cole said. "In Tucson," she confirmed. They looked at each other across the table with the 2 notebooks between them and Nathan's journal and the Murphy papers and the letter from Captain Harlan, and outside the ranch was quiet in the particular way it got when the day was finally done. The horses settled somewhere in the dark, the stars beginning their extravagant Arizona performance, the ruin of the east barn still holding a faint warmth from its own burning. "We can't both go," Cole said. "Someone has to stay with Clara, and the horses need managing." "I'll go," Evelyn said. Cole looked at her. "Alone?" "Ruth Elliston can come with me," she said. "She's been wanting something to do about this since before I got here. She'd come." Cole was quiet for a long moment. She watched him sit with it, really sit with it, in the way he did, letting it settle before he decided. "If Mercer finds out you've gone to Tucson," he started. "If Mercer finds out," she said, "it will be because we're close enough to the truth that it scares him, and I'd rather be somewhere he isn't when that happens." Cole looked at her. He looked at the journal. He looked at his hands on the table, not the calculating look, but something else, something underneath the practical considerations that she'd learned by now to watch for in the spaces between the things he said. "All right," he said. Outside, a horse moved in the dark. The stars were all the way up by now, doing their extravagant thing, indifferent and brilliant and very far away. She pulled Nathan's journal toward her and opened it to the first page and began to read. Ruth Elliston said yes before Evelyn finished asking. She said it the way she did most things, directly, without performing deliberation she wasn't actually having. She was standing in her own kitchen when Evelyn arrived the next morning, and she listened to the plan with her arms crossed and her eyes moving in the way of someone who is not listening passively, but is already building the logistics in her head while the words are still arriving. "Tucson," Ruth said. 2 days. 2 days there, 2 days back, Evelyn said. "If we leave Thursday, we can be back by Monday." "Frank can manage without me," Ruth said, in the tone of a woman who is aware this is true and has mixed feelings about it. "How much are you carrying?" Evelyn set her bag on the table. Ruth looked at it. The notebook, Nathan's journal wrapped in oilcloth, The Murphy papers, the Harlow statement, her own copies of the county records. "That's a case," Ruth said. "I hope so," Evelyn said. "You know the name of the lawyer?" Cole gave me a name, a man named Carver who has an office near the territorial courthouse. He doesn't know us, and we don't know him, which is actually better. No connection to the county, no reason to be cautious about Mercer. Ruth nodded slowly. She picked up the Harlow statement and read it, moving her lips slightly over the key phrases the way people do when they're reading something they want to be sure they've understood accurately. She set it back down. "Nathan documented the Calhoun case," she said. "That means there's a witness we haven't reached yet." "That's what Tucson is for," Evelyn said. "If the Calhouns are still there, if they'll talk." Ruth looked at her. "What if the lawyer says it's not enough?" "Then we come home and we figure out what else we need," Evelyn said. "But I think it is enough. I think it's close to enough. I just need someone with legal standing to confirm it." Ruth uncrossed her arms. "I'll tell Frank tonight," she said. "We leave Thursday at first light." They left Thursday at first light. Cole loaded their bags into Ruth's wagon without much ceremony and stood at the gate when they pulled out, and Clara stood beside him with her arms crossed in a posture that was, Evelyn had come to recognize, a direct inheritance from her uncle. The physical language of someone who is feeling more than they intend to show. She had Evelyn's going wrapped up in her serious eyes and her set jaw, and when Evelyn looked back from the wagon seat, she held the child's gaze for a moment and nodded, which Clara returned with a nod of her own that contained considerably more weight than most adult nods Evelyn had received. Cole said, "Be careful," which coming from him was approximately equivalent to a speech. "We will," she said. The road to Tucson took them south and then west through country that shifted as it went, the flat scrub giving way to wider basins, the mountains sitting along the horizon in the blue morning distance that Nathan had once described in a letter as the mountains not wanting to be reached. She'd thought that was poetic at the time. Sitting in the wagon with the sun coming up behind them and the road unreeling ahead, she thought it was accurate. Ruth drove. She was a better driver than Evelyn and knew it without requiring acknowledgement. They talked in the intermittent way of women with a shared purpose who don't feel the need to fill every silence. Some stretches of road they covered in almost complete quiet, watching the country, and other stretches they talked about practical things, the lawyer, what to say, and how to say it, whether to lead with Nathan's journal or with the pattern of county records, what the Calhouns might or might not remember. Partway through the first afternoon, Ruth said, without preamble, "Frank lost sleep over that barn." Evelyn looked at her. "He didn't know Nathan well," Ruth said, "but he knew what that barn represented. A man builds something like that, you burn it down, you're not sending a message about money. You're sending a message about whether a person gets to exist in a place." She paused. "Frank's been scared of Mercer for 2 years, since he signed that loan agreement and then sat down later and really read it and understood what he'd done." She kept her eyes on the road. "He signed our statement last night. I want you to know that." Evelyn looked at the second notebook she'd brought, where she'd copied the statements and the key documentation. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me," Ruth said. "It's not generosity. We want our ranch and Frank wants to sleep again." She clicked at the horse. "But also, yes, I suppose thank you." They stopped overnight at a way station that was barely more than a roof and a water trough, and a man who didn't ask questions and charged a fair price for both. And Evelyn sat up by the lamp after Ruth slept and went through Nathan's journal one more time. She'd read it 3 times now. She knew the entries, but she kept coming back to one page near the middle. Not the documentation, not the property records and dates and names, but a paragraph Nathan had written that seemed to belong to a different register than the rest of it, the way a person sometimes drops into honesty in the middle of a practical document because they can't help it. He'd written, "I don't know who will read this or what will have happened by the time they do. I only know that Mercer will not stop on his own because men like Mercer never do. Someone will have to stop him. I'm writing this down so that person has something to work with. I hope there's someone who is good at being persistent. That's mostly what this requires. Not courage, exactly. Just a refusal to be discouraged that goes on longer than the other person's willingness to cause trouble." She sat with that for a long time. Not courage, exactly. Just a refusal to be discouraged. She put the journal back in its oilcloth and went to sleep. They reached Tucson the following afternoon. It was bigger than Denton in the way of a town that has had longer to accumulate itself. More buildings, more noise, more layers of the kind of activity that builds up when enough people and commerce and ambition occupy the same space for long enough. Evelyn had grown up in Philadelphia, which made Tucson feel manageable rather than overwhelming, and she navigated them through the main street to the address Cole had given her with the focus of someone who is not interested in the town itself, but in the specific door within it. Carver's office was on a side street near the territorial courthouse, up a flight of external stairs to a second-floor room that contained a desk, 2 chairs for clients, a shelf of law books that had been heavily used and not particularly well cared for, and a man who looked up when they came in with the expression of someone who has been interrupted in the middle of something he'd rather be doing. I was younger than she'd expected, 40, perhaps, or close to it, sandy-haired, with a directness in his eyes that she decided to take as a good sign. He didn't appear surprised to see 2 women walk in unannounced, which was itself useful information about the kind of practice he ran. "Mr. Carver," Evelyn said. "My name is Evelyn Carter. This is Ruth Elliston. We've come from Denton County and we'd like to retain your services." Carver set down his pen. "Sit down, Miss Carter, Mrs. Elliston," he said. "Tell me what you have." She told him. She went through it in order: the loan structure, the county records, the consent document mechanism, the properties already transferred, the documentation Nathan had compiled, the Harlow and Elliston statements. She set each piece on his desk as she named it. He didn't pick any of them up until she'd finished, and then he went through them slowly, in silence, with the reading quality of a man who is looking for specific things rather than getting an impression. Ruth sat in the second chair and said nothing, which was exactly right. Carver read Nathan's journal entry about the Calhoun case and then looked up. This man, Nathan Cross, documented this how long before he died? The entries run from approximately June through September of last year, Evelyn said. He died in October. And the Calhouns? Do you know if they're still in Tucson? We don't know, Evelyn said. That was going to be our next question. Carver made a note. He set the journal down and looked at the county records copies and the pattern she'd mapped in the margins. The timeline of surveyor activity versus the loan pressure escalation versus the property transfers. He was quiet for a long time. Ruth glanced at Evelyn. Evelyn kept her eyes on Carver. "This is fraud," he said finally. "What you've documented here, the rate manipulation, the consent document mechanism, the pattern of acquisition along a specific corridor, is a coherent scheme, not a series of hard bargains. A scheme." He tapped the journal. "With this corroborating the consent document mechanism from a third-party witness, and if the Calhouns can be located and will confirm Nathan's documentation, you have a case." He paused. "A federal case, potentially. This corridor being positioned for rail access makes it a matter of interstate commerce, which takes it outside Mercer's local influence." "There's a federal marshal who comes through Tucson," Evelyn said. "Nathan Cross knew him. They served together." Carver looked at her. "Name?" "Briggs," she said. "Marshal Ira Briggs." Something shifted in Carver's expression. "I know Briggs," he said. "He's honest." He said it as a statement of significant fact. "He's also someone who will want to see documentation before he moves, which is why what you've built here matters." He looked at the papers on his desk. "I'll need 3 days to review this fully and draft a formal complaint. Can you stay?" Evelyn thought about Cole at the ranch with 10 days left before August. "We have to be back by Monday," she said. "I can work faster than 3 days," Carver said. "It won't be as neat as I'd like, but I can have something for Briggs by Saturday if you can find the Calhouns before then." He gave them an address to try, a boarding house on the east side of town where displaced ranch families sometimes landed. They thanked him and left. The Calhouns were at the boarding house. Not the whole family. The old man had died the previous winter, which the woman who opened the door told them with the matter-of-fact grief of someone who has finished the acute phase and is living in the long, flat aftermath. But Martha Calhoun was there, 50-something, with the look of a woman who had been physically strong her whole life and was now strong in a different and harder way. She remembered Nathan Cross. The expression that crossed her face when Evelyn said his name was not happiness exactly, but the specific quality of being reminded that someone good had existed. "He came out to the ranch about 3 months before we lost it," she said. They were sitting in the small front room of the boarding house, the three of them, while somewhere in the building a child ran back and forth overhead. Said he'd been hearing things, asked if he could look at our papers. We showed him. She paused. He was angry, not loud about it, the quiet kind of angry that's worse. Did you show him the document you signed at the time of the first interest notice? Evelyn asked. Martha looked at her. The acknowledgement. Yes. He looked at it for a long time, Martha said. He said, this isn't what they told you it was. And I said, I know that now. And he said, I'm going to write this down. And I said, what good will that do? And he said, she stopped. She looked at her hands for a moment. He said, I don't know yet, but it'll do more good written than not. Evelyn thought about a paragraph in the middle of a journal, a refusal to be discouraged that goes on longer than the other person's willingness to cause trouble. Mrs. Calhoun, she said, would you be willing to make a formal statement about your loan, the consent document, Nathan's visit, what he documented in your presence? Martha looked at her steadily. Will it stop him? She asked. Mercer. I believe so, Evelyn said. I can't promise, but I believe so. Martha was quiet. She looked at Ruth, who had said almost nothing since they'd arrived, and who received the look with the particular solidity of a woman who has made her own decision and is not going to pretend she hasn't. All right, Martha said. What do I need to say? They spent 2 hours with Martha Calhoun. Evelyn wrote the statement carefully, reading each section back, revising twice on Martha's corrections. Small things, precise things. The kind of corrections that come from someone who knows exactly what happened and wants it recorded exactly that way. Martha signed it with a hand that didn't waver. Ruth witnessed it. Walking back to the boarding house where they'd taken a room, Ruth said, Nathan talked to them 3 months before they lost the ranch. Yes, Evelyn said. He was trying to help them. He was trying to build something that would help them, Evelyn said. He just didn't have enough time. Ruth walked beside her in silence for a moment. He sent you that last letter before he went into the mountains, she said. It wasn't quite a question. Yes. He was tying things up, Ruth said. Wasn't he? He knew it was risky and he was making arrangements. Evelyn thought about that. She hadn't let herself think about it directly, about whether the 14th letter had been Nathan's way of ensuring she was taken care of, or taken somewhere specific, or put somewhere safe. Whether the proposal had been an act of love or an act of provision, or whether, in the mind of a man like Nathan Cross, those two things were the same. I think so, she said finally. Ruth nodded. She didn't say anything else. They brought Martha Calhoun's statement to Carver's office the next morning, and he read it and added it to the file he was building and said, Saturday, come back Saturday morning. Saturday morning, Carver had a document. It was 11 pages, handwritten in a tight legal hand on paper that smelled like the particular seriousness of formal documentation. He walked them through it in an hour. The nature of the complaint, the evidence cited, the legal grounds under territorial fraud statute, and the federal commerce provisions that Carver believed applied. He had already sent a message to Marshal Briggs, who was in Tucson that week. Briggs would meet them at 2 o'clock. Ira Briggs was a large man who had probably been even larger before age had reduced him slightly, with a face that had the quality of someone who has been lied to by professionals for 30 years and has stopped finding it interesting. He shook Evelyn's hand first, which she noted, and then Ruth's, and sat down across the table from Carver in a room at the back of the courthouse and looked at the document. He read it without speaking. He turned pages. He stopped twice and went back. Evelyn sat very still. Ruth sat very still. Carver sat the way lawyers sit when they've presented their case and are waiting for the reaction and have learned not to fill the silence. Briggs set the document down. Nathan Cross, he said. It came out flat, but it wasn't flat underneath. Yes, Evelyn said. He built the foundation of this. Without his documentation, we didn't have the Calhoun case, and without the Calhoun case, the consent document mechanism was circumstantial. Briggs looked at her. Who are you exactly? She explained herself. She kept it brief. Philadelphia, the letters, the train, the spare room, the account books. Briggs listened with the quality of a man who has a very accurate sense of when he's being given a complete account and when he isn't. You built most of this, he said. Nathan built the foundation, she said. I built on top of it. Briggs was quiet for a moment. Mercer has a relationship with the county sheriff, he said. I want you to know that I know that, so you know I'm not operating through channels that will warn him. How long? Evelyn asked. Before you can act on this? I need 2 weeks to coordinate with the territorial prosecutor's office, Briggs said. I want this done right. I don't want anything that gives a defense attorney a procedural argument. He paused. You have a debt due end of August. August 30th, Evelyn said. That's tight, Briggs said. I know, she said. Briggs looked at the document again. He looked at Nathan's journal, which Carver had included as a supporting exhibit with the relevant pages flagged. He looked at the Calhoun statement and the Harlow statement and the pattern of county records laid out in the appendix. I'll move in 2 weeks, he said. That gives you until the 30th if everything proceeds as it should. He looked at Evelyn directly. If Mercer comes for that debt before I can act, you do not confront him. You stall. Whatever it takes to buy time. Understood, she said. And if he tries to take property or use physical intimidation, I'll send word to you immediately, Evelyn said. We have neighbors who can ride. Briggs nodded. He stood up and shook Carver's hand and then Evelyn's again. Nathan Cross was a good man, he said. I was sorry to hear about the dragoons. He picked up his hat. Let's make sure his work amounted to something. He left. Carver looked at Evelyn across the table. You have until the 30th, he said. Go home. They drove back to Denton in a different silence than the one they'd driven south in. This one had more weight and more shape, the specific heaviness of something that has been set in motion and cannot be recalled. Ruth drove with the same capable efficiency as before, but her jaw was set in a way that told Evelyn she was thinking hard about something. About halfway through the second day, with the ranch country coming back around them and the ridgelines in the distance looking exactly the way they always had, Ruth said, What happens if Mercer moves before Briggs does? Then we stall, Evelyn said. And if he won't be stalled? Evelyn was quiet for a moment. Then we use what we have, she said. Not legally. We won't have the marshal behind us yet. But Mercer doesn't know what we have. If he comes for the property, and I tell him we have Nathan's journal and the documented pattern and statements from 3 families, he doesn't know I can't act on it immediately. He doesn't know Briggs hasn't moved yet. Ruth looked at her sideways. You'd bluff him. I'd tell him the truth, Evelyn said. I'd just tell it in a way that suggested the consequences were more immediate than they are. Ruth absorbed this. That's either very brave or very foolish, she said. Probably both, Evelyn said. Ruth made a sound that was the closest thing to a laugh she'd produced in several days, short and dry and genuine. Cole was in the yard when they came up the road, which meant he'd been watching for them. He came to the gate and his eyes went first to Evelyn and then to Ruth, and then back to Evelyn in the way of someone reading a face for information before the words arrive. Well, he said. We have a lawyer and a federal marshal, Evelyn said. Briggs moves in 2 weeks. Something moved through Cole's face that wasn't quite relief. It was too complicated for relief, too aware of how much could still go wrong. But it was something. 2 weeks, he said. 2 weeks, she said. Which means we need to find a way to make the payment look possible until then. Give Mercer no reason to move early. Cole looked at her. I've been working on that, he said, in a tone that suggested what he'd been working on was not going to be simple. They went inside. Clara descended on Evelyn with the compressed energy of a child who has been patient for 4 days and has reached the limit of it, and Evelyn sat down on the bench in the kitchen and received the full account of what had happened while she was gone. The horses, the fence that had needed emergency repair, a hawk that had been seen sitting on the burned barn wall 2 mornings in a row, which Clara had decided was significant, and let the account wash over her while the familiar smell of the kitchen settled around her and something in her chest that had been held tight for 4 days began, cautiously, to ease. Cole set coffee on the table. He waited until Clara had run out of hawk news and been redirected to her lessons, and then he sat down. There's something you don't know about yet, he said. She looked at him. Nathan filed a mining claim, Cole said. 4 years ago, silver, on the south quarter of the property. The rocky section near the ridge that we've never grazed because it's not worth the effort. He set a piece of paper on the table. It was a copy of a filing, official, with the territorial seal. He never told me. I found it in the same desk drawer where I found your letters. The original correspondence, I mean. It was folded into the back of the drawer, and I'd never looked that far. He paused. I don't know if he found silver. I don't know if there's anything there, but the claim is current. Nathan paid the annual fees forward before he died. She picked up the filing. She read it carefully. A current mining claim, she said slowly, is a transferable asset. Yes, Cole said. Which means it has monetary value independent of whether there's actually silver there, she said. The potential is what's worth something, the rights. There's a man, Cole said. A mining investor named Aldford, who operates out of Tucson, comes through Denton twice a year looking for claims to purchase. He's due through in the next week. He met her eyes. A silver claim on a property along the Southern Water Corridor. Even with no proven yield, he might pay for it. Mining investors buy potential. She set the filing down. How much? She said. Realistically. I don't know, Cole said. Maybe not enough. But maybe, combined with what the herd brings at summer prices, maybe enough to reach the balance. Or close to it. She looked at the number she'd written in her notebook 2 months ago. The range between 580 and 620. You'd have to sell a piece of your own property, she said. A piece Nathan never told me about, Cole said, that he apparently set aside for exactly this kind of moment. He said it without bitterness, but with something in it. A sadness and a gratitude tangled together so thoroughly they'd become the same thing. He thought ahead, he said quietly. He did, Evelyn said. They looked at the filing on the table between them, and she thought about a man who built barns and wrote letters and documented crimes and filed mining claims on rocky sections of land he'd never use, because he was the kind of person who made provisions for futures he might not be present for. The investor Aldford arrived in Denton on a Wednesday, which left them 11 days before the end of August. He was a lean, energetic man of about 55 who wore good boots and looked at land the way Evelyn looked at account books, with the specific focus of someone reading a thing for what it actually said rather than what it appeared to say. Cole met him at Hargrove's store, which was where Aldford always stopped first, and brought him out to the ranch that afternoon. Evelyn had prepared the documentation, the original filing, the geological notes Nathan had made in a separate section of the desk drawer that she'd found when she went back through it, her own mapping of the claim boundaries from the filing. Aldford looked at the south quarter. He walked it, which took time because the terrain was difficult and he was being thorough. Cole walked with him. Evelyn stayed at the house with Clara and waited. It was 3 hours before they came back. Aldford sat down at the kitchen table with the expression of a man who has made a decision and is now performing the preliminary steps before he states it. No proven yield, he said. No, Cole said. The geology is promising, Aldford said. The rock formation along the eastern face is consistent with silver-bearing ore and other claims I've seen in the territory. But I'm buying potential, not certainty. He paused. I can offer $340. The number sat in the room. Evelyn had already done the math. She did it again without looking at her notebook because she'd been doing it in her head for 3 hours. The herd at summer prices, she'd gotten a figure from Cole that morning, conservative, would bring somewhere between $240 and $280, depending on the day and the market. Combined with Aldford's offer, the total reached between $580 and $620, the exact range she'd calculated as the debt. She looked at Cole. He was looking at Aldford with the careful expression of a man who is not going to show what the number means to him before he's thought through whether it's enough. $340, Cole said. That's my offer, Aldford said. The corridor location adds value. I won't pretend otherwise, but the risk is real. Cole looked at Evelyn. The look was quick and unreadable to anyone who didn't know him, which Aldford didn't, but she knew it by now. It was the look that meant he was asking for something he wouldn't ask out loud. She nodded. A small movement. Cole looked back at Aldford. $340, he said. Done. Aldford extended his hand and they shook, and it was done, the way things are done in country where there isn't time for anything but directness. After Aldford left, Cole stood at the kitchen window for a moment with his hand on the frame and looked out at the yard. She could see the south quarter from the window, the rocky section along the ridge that Nathan had walked 4 years ago and seen something in and filed a claim on and paid forward and never mentioned. It's going to be close, Cole said. The herd prices aren't guaranteed. I know, she said. If the market drops even a little, Then we'll be a few dollars short, she said, and we'll figure that out when we know. He turned from the window. He looked at her with the particular expression she'd learned meant he was about to say something he'd been sitting with for a while. "You've been here since May," he said. "Yes," she said. "You came for Nathan," he said. "I came because Nathan asked me to," she said carefully. "That's different from coming for him. I didn't know him. I knew his letters." She paused. "What I know now, who I know now, is different." Cole was quiet. He looked at the table and then back at her. "I'm not good at this," he said. "I mean the saying of things." "I know," she said. "You're better at the doing of them." Something in his face shifted. Not quite a smile, but the thing that happened to his face when something landed true. He looked out the window again. He looked at the South Quarter Ridge. "Nathan would have liked you," he said. He was better at saying it than I am, but he would have said you were exactly the kind of person this place needed. She looked at the table, at the notebook, at the mining claim filing that Nathan had set aside 4 years ago in the back of a desk drawer. "I think this place needed what Nathan left behind," she said. "I'm just the one who knew how to read it." Cole looked at her. The light in the kitchen was the afternoon light, the copper-adjacent kind that came through the western window and made the room look like something worth preserving. He said, "That's not all you are," and then appeared to have run out of words, which she had learned was not emptiness, but the opposite, the place where language stopped being equal to what was actually there. "I know," she said quietly. 5 days before the end of August, Mercer came himself. He didn't send Garrett. He came in person, in the middle of the morning, on a good horse, with the particular confidence of a man who has been calculating and is now arriving at the conclusion of his calculation. He came through the gate without being invited and stopped in the yard and looked around at the ranch. The house, the half-cleared ruin of the barn, the horses in the paddock, with the expression of a man taking inventory of what is about to become his. Cole was there. Evelyn was there, which Mercer registered with a slight adjustment of his attention. "Cross," Mercer said. "We should talk." "You can say what you need to say," Cole said. Mercer looked at Evelyn. He had the measured quality she remembered from seeing him across the street in June, the face that had settled into authority and used it like a tool. "Miss Carter," he said, "you've been busy this summer." "Somewhat," she said. "Visiting lawyers in Tucson," he said. "Speaking with Old Man Harlow, driving out to the Murphy place." He said it pleasantly, the way you say things when you want the person to understand the full reach of your knowledge. "I have good information, Miss Carter. I hope you understand that." "I'd expect so," she said. He looked at Cole. "The debt is due in 5 days," he said. "I'm prepared to discuss an arrangement that would resolve this without difficulty. Partial transfer of the southern quarter." "No," Cole said. Mercer paused. "You don't have the money, Cole." "We'll have it by the 30th, Cole said. Mercer looked at him steadily. "I don't believe you," he said. "And I want you to understand that my patience has been considerable. The barn was a warning. I don't enjoy—" "Don't," Evelyn said. Mercer looked at her. She had Nathan's journal in the bag at her feet. She had told herself she would not use it as a bluff, that she would only state the truth. She was going to state it now. "You should know," she said, keeping her voice even and her eyes directly on his, "that we have a formal complaint filed with a federal marshal. We have documented evidence of fraud across 7 properties in this county. The rate manipulation, the consent document mechanism, the pattern of acquisition timed to railroad survey activity. We have signed statements from 3 families. We have the testimony of a woman in Tucson who met personally with Nathan Cross while he was documenting your activities last summer." She paused. "The complaint names you specifically. It names 2 county officials, and it names the holding company and its connection to the rail interest." She looked at him without blinking. "If anything happens to this property, to this family, or to anyone in this county who has given a statement, the full record goes to the territorial prosecutor the same day, not through the marshal, directly." The yard was very quiet. Mercer looked at her for a long time. She watched him recalculate, watched it happen in his face, the slight adjustment of a man who has arrived at a conclusion and is now finding the conclusion complicated. He had not known about Nathan's journal. She could see that in the specific quality of his stillness. He looked at Cole, then back at Evelyn. You can't prove intent, he said. But the authority in his voice had changed texture. It was still authoritative. It was no longer certain. I don't have to prove intent, she said. I have to provide the documentation that establishes a pattern. The prosecutor's office determines intent. She held his gaze. You burned that barn. You know it, and we know it. Add that to what we have, and what we have become something a federal prosecutor finds very interesting. Mercer sat on his horse for a moment. He was a man who had been doing this for years because nobody had ever built the documentation, because people lost their land and left and took their grief with them and didn't leave anything behind that could be read. Nathan had understood that. Evelyn had understood it. And now the thing that had always protected Mercer, the silence of people who had lost too much to fight, was not there anymore. He looked at the ranch one more time. He looked at it the way he'd looked at it when he rode in, taking inventory. But the inventory had changed. He turned his horse and rode back out through the gate without another word. Cole stood in the yard and watched him go. Evelyn stood beside him. Neither of them spoke until the sound of the horse was gone. Then Cole said quietly, "You told him the marshal hadn't moved yet." "I told him we had a complaint filed," she said. "Which is true." "You didn't tell him Briggs needs 2 weeks." "No," she said. "I didn't." Cole looked at the gate, at the empty road beyond it. "He'll check," he said. "He has people in Tucson." "I know," she said, "which means we have a few days at most before he knows exactly where we stand." She turned and looked at him. "We have to have the money on the 30th, every dollar. We pay him in front of witnesses, the sheriff, the county clerk, people from the community, and we do it before Briggs moves, so the debt is cleared and he has no legal lever left. And then when Briggs moves, there's nothing for Mercer to use as a counterweight." Cole looked at her. "If the herd prices come in low—" "I know," she said. They stood with that. The last 5 days of August moved the way time moves when everything that matters is in the hands of things you can't entirely control. Slowly in the day, and then suddenly fast, and then one morning you wake up and it's the 30th. The herd sold on the 28th. The price came in at the lower end of what Cole had projected, $236, which was $11 less than the most conservative figure they'd planned around. Combined with Aldford's payment, they were short by between $35 and $50, depending on which interpretation of Mercer's interest clause held. Evelyn sat at the kitchen table with the final numbers and felt the specific cold clarity of a person who has done everything right and arrived at a number that is still not enough. She sat with it for about 10 minutes, then she got up and went to find Ruth Elliston. Ruth said, without being asked to explain the number, "How short?" "35 to 50, Evelyn said. "Depending." Ruth was quiet. Then she went to the back of the house and came back with a tin box that she set on the table and opened. Inside was money, paper and coin, not a large amount. Ruth counted it out, $30. "It's not 50, Ruth said. "It might be enough," Evelyn said, "if the lower interest interpretation holds." Frank Elliston appeared in the doorway. He'd apparently been listening. He reached into his vest pocket and produced a handful of coins that he set on the table beside the tin without comment. It was enough. On August 30th, Cole Cross walked into Silas Mercer's office with Evelyn beside him and Frank Elliston and Old Man Harlow behind them, and Ruth Elliston and 2 other ranch wives from the community waiting outside. And he set $618 on the desk in front of Mercer and the county clerk who had come to witness the transaction, and he said, "Count it." Mercer counted it. He looked up. His face had the quality of a man receiving news he prepared for, but still did not want to receive. "The balance," Cole said. "Full, with every dollar of interest that can be legally justified." He set Evelyn's interest calculation on top of the money, her clean, annotated breakdown of what was owed and what wasn't, 2 months of account work compressed into one authoritative page. The interpretation that exceeds that amount is not legally supportable, as our legal counsel has confirmed. If you want to contest that in court, you're welcome to try. The clerk looked at the calculation. He looked at Mercer. Mercer said nothing. The clerk recorded the payment as made in full. He signed the receipt. He gave Cole his copy. Cole folded it and put it in his coat pocket. Mercer looked at Evelyn one last time. She held his gaze. "We'll be in contact," she said, "through the appropriate channels." They walked out into the August sunlight where the neighbors were waiting, and behind them the door to Mercer's office closed with the sound of a chapter ending, And 11 days later, Marshal Ira Briggs rode into Denton County with 2 deputies and a federal warrant, and the documentation that Nathan Cross had begun in a leather journal and Evelyn Carter had finished in a notebook with ink-stained margins did exactly what careful, persistent, documented truth does when it finally reaches the right hands. It held. The warrant arrived on a Tuesday, which felt appropriate to Evelyn in a way she couldn't entirely explain. Tuesday being the day Mercer had told 3 men at the feed store counter that the Cross Ranch would be his before the first snow, and Tuesday now being the day that particular certainty came undone. She wasn't there when Briggs rode in. She heard about it the way most of Denton heard about it, through the particular speed of small-town information, which moves faster than horses when the news is significant enough. Frank Elliston came to the ranch in the late morning with the news that Briggs and his deputies had gone directly to Mercer's office and served the warrant, and that the 2 county officials named in the complaint had received separate notices requiring their appearance before the territorial court in Tucson within the fortnight. Cole was in the yard when Frank arrived. He listened to the account with his arms at his sides and his face doing the thing it did when he was absorbing something large, very still, the way deep water is still, without being empty. "The 2 officials," Cole said. "Aldridge at the county records office?" "Aldridge, yes," Frank said, "and Purcell from the Land Assessment Board." Briggs apparently had documentation on both of them going back 3 years. Cole looked at Evelyn. She was standing at the edge of the porch, and she looked back at him, and neither of them said anything, because there was too much to say, and the particular morning light made the yard look like something permanent, which it now was in a way it hadn't been for months. "It'll take time," Evelyn said finally. "The court process. It won't be fast and it won't be clean." "I know," Cole said. "Mercer has lawyers," Frank said. "Good ones. He'll fight it." "He can fight it," Evelyn said. "Fighting it means every piece of documentation becomes public record. Every family he took land from becomes a matter of formal testimony. Every interest manipulation, every consent document, every surveyor visit time to a loan call." She looked at Frank. "A man like Mercer survives by operating in the gap between what people know and what can be proven. We close that gap. He can fight all he wants. What he's fighting with is what we gave him, which is nothing." Frank was quiet for a moment. He had the look of a man who has been scared of something for a long time and is now in the uncertain territory of no longer being scared, which is its own kind of disorientation. "The Harlow family," he said, "and the Murphys, the Calhouns." "The court will address the fraudulent transfers," Evelyn said. "I don't know what's recoverable. That's Carver's territory, not mine. But the transfers are part of the complaint, and Briggs was clear that the territorial prosecutor intends to pursue them." Frank nodded slowly. He looked at Cole. "You held it," he said simply. Cole said, "We held it." And the way he said it, the slight shift of that one word, was not lost on anyone standing in the yard that morning. Frank left. Cole came up onto the porch and stood beside Evelyn, and they looked at the property. The house, the half-rebuilt barn, the horses in the paddock, the vegetable garden that had been fighting the dryness all summer and had, through sheer stubbornness, mostly won. "Clara's going to want to hear the full account," Cole said. "She's going to ask very specific questions," Evelyn said. "She asked specific questions about everything," Cole said, and there was something in his voice when he said it, a warmth so habitual he probably didn't hear it anymore, the way you stop hearing the sound a house makes when it settles because it's been settling your whole life. Clara heard the full account at supper. She sat across the table from both of them with her dinner going cold because she kept forgetting to eat while she was listening, and she asked specific questions. What exactly did the warrant say? Did Briggs have a gun when he went into the office? What happens to Aldridge? Will the Calhoun family get their ranch back? And Evelyn answered each one as honestly as she could, which meant some answers were satisfying and some were, "I don't know yet." And Clara received both kinds with equal seriousness. When the questions ran out, Clara ate her cold supper in silence for a moment, and then said, "Nathan's journal is what made the difference." "Yes," Evelyn said. "He knew," Clara said, not with wonder, with the matter-of-fact quality she brought to most things that mattered. "He was thinking about us even when he was somewhere else." The table was quiet. Cole reached across and pushed Clara's cup closer to her in the way of a man who doesn't have the words, and so does the small adjacent thing instead. Clara picked up the cup and drank without appearing to notice the gesture, which meant she noticed it completely. The barn went up in the first 2 weeks of September. It was not the community's idea. Or rather, it was. But nobody convened a meeting about it, and nobody organized it officially, and nobody sent out a formal call. It happened the way things happen in frontier communities when a shared injury has been answered, and the answer has released something that was previously occupied with fear. People showed up. The Ellistons came the first morning with Frank and their 2 sons and lumber that Frank had been holding back for a fence repair he decided could wait. The Reindorfs came with their boy and 2 hired hands and a set of tools that were better than anything Cole had. Ruth arrived with food, not as a gesture, but because she'd done the math and understood that building a barn is a multi-day project, and people working hard need to eat, and someone has to think about that, and she was someone who thought about things. Over the following days, others arrived. The Murphys, the Sandersons, 2 families Evelyn didn't know well yet, who had apparently heard and decided to come anyway. Old Man Harlow came on the 3rd day and stood watching the work with his big, worked-out hands, and then picked up a hammer with the careful deliberateness of a man who has been idle too long and is correcting that, and nobody made a ceremony about it, and he didn't want them to. Evelyn worked alongside them. She wasn't skilled at barn construction. She was honest about that. But she understood what needed organizing, and a construction project with 12 people who've never built together before needs someone who can see the overall shape and communicate it without generating conflict, which turned out to be something she was capable of. Cole watched her do it with an expression she'd seen on his face a few times before and had never found a clean name for. Clara was everywhere. She carried things, held things, fetched water, asked questions of every person working until each of them had explained their specific job to her satisfaction. She told the Reindorf boy that the west wall needed to be framed the way Nathan had originally built it. She apparently had a detailed memory of the original construction that nobody had expected. And the Reindorf boy, who was 17 and not accustomed to taking direction from 8-year-olds, looked at Cole, who looked at the west wall and then at Clara and said, "She's right," which settled it. On the 4th evening, when this frame was up and the roof was beginning to take shape, Ruth stood beside Evelyn at the edge of the site with a cup of coffee and looked at what they'd built. "You know," Ruth said, "when you stepped off that wagon in June, I thought you'd last 3 weeks." "I almost didn't," Evelyn said. "What stopped you?" Evelyn looked at the barn frame against the evening sky. She thought about a rope frame bed and a cracked basin and 14 letters tied with string. "Clara kissed me on the cheek," she said. Ruth drank her coffee. "That child," she said with a particular warmth that wasn't soft, "is going to be formidable." "She already is," Evelyn said. The barn was finished in 8 days. It was not identical to what had burned. The east wall was slightly different. The door configuration adjusted based on what Cole had learned from the night of the fire about where horses needed to go and how fast. And it was better in a few ways that Nathan's original design hadn't anticipated, because Nathan had built with what he knew then, and they had built with what they knew now, which included the cost of losing it. On the last day, when the final work was done and the horses were walked into the new stalls for the first time, Clara stood in the center of the barn and looked up at the roof with the same expression she brought to things that satisfied her deep and specific sense of how things ought to be. "It smells right," she said. Cole looked at her. "It smells like new lumber," he said. "It'll smell right soon," Clara said, with the confidence of a person who knows how time works and is patient about it. It was a Saturday evening in late September when Cole asked her. It wasn't planned, or if it was planned, the plan was so internal that it looked from the outside like it simply happened the way things happen when they've been building long enough that the moment becomes inevitable. They were at the kitchen table, which was where most of the significant things between them had happened, and Clara was in bed, and the lamp was burning, and Evelyn was going through the last of the documentation she'd been organizing to send to Carver, the formal record of everything, compiled and indexed, which she'd decided to do not because anyone asked her to, but because it seemed right that it should exist in a clean and findable form. Cole had been quiet for a while. Not the working quiet, the other kind, the sitting with something kind. She looked up. He was looking at the table. He looked up when she looked up, and they held each other's gaze for a moment in the lamplight, and she thought, "He's been thinking about how to say this for a while." "I know this isn't what you came here for," he said. He said it carefully, with the precision of someone who has been working on the sentence and is now committed to it. You came for Nathan. You came for a different life than this one. He paused. I know I'm not what you planned. Cole, she said. Let me finish, he said. I'm not good at this, and if I stop, I won't start again. He looked at the table for one moment and then back at her. You held this place together when I couldn't. You held Clara together without meaning to. And she's different now than she was in May, and it's not because of me, it's because of you and I. He stopped. I know how to ask you to stay for the right reasons. I know how to ask you to stay because we need you, but that's not. He looked at her. That's not why I'm asking. She set her pen down. Then why are you asking? She said. Not a challenge, a genuine question, the kind she asked when she wanted the actual answer rather than the managed one. He was quiet for a moment. The lamp between them burned with its small, steady light. Because this kitchen is better when you're in it, he said. Because I sleep better when I know you're in the house. Because you went back into a burning barn for horses that weren't yours, and you drove to Tucson for a ranch that wasn't yours, and you sat across from a federal marshal and didn't blink. He paused. Because you read Nathan's journal, and you understood him, and I've spent 7 months not being able to talk about him to anyone who understood him, and with you I can. He met her eyes. And because when you laugh, which you don't do enough, I think about it afterward. I've been thinking about it for months. She looked at him. There are moments when you understand that the life you planned and the life you're living have diverged so completely that comparing them is no longer a useful activity. She had planned a life with a man she'd known through letters, a man who had been real and good and who had thought ahead in ways she was still discovering. She had arrived at a different life, with a different man, in a different kitchen, and the different life had asked more of her than the planned one ever could have, and she had given it, and what she had received in return was not what she'd expected, but was, she understood this sitting at the kitchen table in the lamplight in late September, more than she'd known to want. I know you're not what I planned, she said. You're what happened instead. She looked at him. I've been finding out for months that what happened instead is better. Cole looked at her for a long moment. Is that a yes? He said. That's a yes, she said. He nodded, in the way of a man receiving something he'd been hoping for and is not quite caught up to yet. He reached across the table and set his hand over hers. Not romantic exactly, not performed, just the solid weight of a person who means to stay. And she turned her hand over and held it, and neither of them said anything else for a while because they were both people who understood that some things were better held than spoken. They were married in November, in the way of practical frontier people who see no reason to delay what's been decided. Carver came up from Tucson, which surprised her and moved her more than she let on. Ruth and Frank Elliston were there. The Reindorfs came. Old Man Harlow came, dressed in a coat that had been good 20 years ago and was still the best thing he owned. Martha Calhoun sent a letter from Tucson that arrived the day before, which Evelyn read alone in the spare room, the room that had been hers since May and would stop being hers after tomorrow, and folded carefully and put with Nathan's letters in the trunk. She still had all 14 letters. She thought about that sometimes, about what it meant that she'd kept them, not as a complication or a grief, but as a fact of the particular shape her life had taken. Nathan Cross had written 14 letters to a woman he'd never met, and in doing so had set in motion a chain of events that ended in this kitchen, this family, this morning. That was not a small thing. That was not something to put away. Clara was her maid of honor, self-appointed, which meant she stood beside Evelyn with her boots on and her braid mostly intact, and the most serious expression she had ever worn in 8 years of being serious. And when the moment came, she produced 2 rings she'd been keeping in her apron pocket with the gravity of someone entrusted with something significant. Cole's ring went on Evelyn's finger without trouble. Evelyn's ring went on Cole's finger after a brief struggle that Clara managed with a determination that brooked no interference. Afterwards, Clara said with deep satisfaction, "Now it's right." Cole looked at his niece. "What was wrong with it before?" "It wasn't finished," Clara said simply, and went to find the food. The territorial court proceedings against Mercer ran through the winter and into the following spring. Carver kept them informed by letter. The progress was real but slow, in the way of legal processes that are thorough precisely because the stakes are high. Mercer's lawyers contested on procedural grounds first, which Carver had anticipated and prepared for, and when the procedural challenges failed, the case moved to the substance of the complaint, which meant the documentation that Evelyn had built and Nathan had begun became the backbone of a formal legal record that would outlast everyone in the room. Harlow's statement was entered into evidence. The Murphy papers were entered into evidence. Martha Calhoun testified in person in January on a cold Tuesday morning in a Tucson courtroom, and Evelyn would have given a great deal to have been there for it, but couldn't make the trip and received Carver's account by letter, which said only, Mrs. Calhoun was precise and unflinching, and the defense had no good answer to her. In March, Mercer's 2 county officials accepted reduced terms in exchange for full cooperation with the court. Their cooperation confirmed what the documentation had already established, and confirmed it in the specific, unambiguous language of men who have decided that Mercer's fortunes are no longer worth protecting with their own. In April, Silas Mercer was convicted on 4 counts of fraud under territorial statute and 2 counts of conspiracy to defraud under federal commerce provisions. He was sentenced to 7 years. The holding company's remaining property holdings in Denton County were placed under court administration pending restitution proceedings for the families who had lost land. The Harlow case was among the first addressed. The property couldn't be fully restored. 2 of the years of lost income were simply gone, and the legal system is not equipped to give people back time. But there was a financial settlement that was not nothing, and Carver wrote that Old Man Harlow had received the news in his room above the dry goods store and had opened the window afterward for the first time in anyone's recent memory. She thought about that image for days. A window opened. The ranch through that first winter and spring was not easy. Ranching was not easy. She understood that clearly now in a way she hadn't when she arrived, understanding it from the outside versus living inside it. There were months when the money was tight in ways that required genuine creative thinking about which expenses could wait and which absolutely couldn't. Cole had a tendency to absorb problems into himself rather than name them, which was something she'd known since the first summer and had not fixed and was not going to fix, because it was simply who he was. And what she'd learned to do was ask the direct question at the right moment, when the weight of the problem had made the question answerable. She still burned things on the stove occasionally. Cole had stopped commenting on this with the specificity he'd started with and had graduated to a look, which she found she could tolerate. Clara grew. 8 to 9, and the serious quality didn't leave her, but it opened, the way a fist opens when what it was holding is no longer in danger. She started laughing more, and her laugh, when it came, was the full-body laugh of a child who has decided she's somewhere safe. She learned her arithmetic without pretending to resist it, and then turned immediately to pestering Evelyn about what came after arithmetic, and Evelyn taught her, and then taught her more, and at some point in the winter understood that she was doing the thing she'd always done, teaching, and that it had simply changed its shape, as things do when you stop trying to control their form and let them find the form that works. She wrote to Margaret in Philadelphia. Not about everything. A letter about everything would have taken weeks to write, and Margaret would have needed to sit down to read it. She wrote enough, that she had not come home, that she was well, that she was married to a man who was quiet and good and had Nathan's eyes and none of Nathan's ease, and that there was a child she was helping raise who had recently decided that the study of horses and the study of mathematics were not as different as people thought, because both of them required you to understand something's nature before you tried to influence it. Margaret wrote back with the specific combination of relief and bafflement that Evelyn had expected. In May, a year from the month she'd arrived, Cole expanded the ranch's operation to include a supply arrangement with 2 of the neighboring properties. It wasn't his idea, which she found significant. It came from a conversation between Cole and Frank Elliston and 2 other ranchers who had been doing the informal version of shared resources for years, and decided, after the winter, that formalizing it made sense. They were thinking about buying supplies in bulk from Tucson and distributing among the properties to cut costs, and Cole had contacts in Tucson through Carver's network now, and Evelyn had, as Frank put it with the directness she'd come to expect from him, the organizational capacity to make it actually function rather than dissolve into good intentions. She wrote the supply agreement herself. 3 pages, clear terms, signed by all 4 ranchers at the Elliston kitchen table on a Thursday evening, with Ruth providing coffee, and Clara, who had come along and was supposed to be doing her letters in the corner, listening to every word. Afterward, on the drive back, Cole said, "You know, you just built a business." "I organized a shared purchasing arrangement," she said. "Same thing," he said. She considered this. I suppose it is, she said. He glanced at her with the sideways look she'd learned to watch for. Nathan would have done this eventually, he said. He was always thinking about how to make the community more connected. He thought isolated ranches were fragile and connected ones weren't. He paused. He'd have liked seeing it happen. She thought about 14 letters, about a man who had written about copper light and Clara's boots, and had also, quietly, been documenting crimes and filing mining claims, and making provisions and writing things down so that whoever came after would have something to work with. He did help make it happen, she said. Cole was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said. I suppose he did. The first anniversary of the barn burning was in August, and nobody marked it officially, but on that particular August night, Evelyn found herself standing in the new barn in the dark for a few minutes, alone, with the horses breathing around her and the smell of new lumber that had become, Clara had been right, the smell of something established, something that had earned its own character through the simple act of being used and being here. She thought about what she'd learned, not the practical things, though she'd learned those too, more than she'd expected. How to read a horse's mood, how to make cornbread that didn't scrape, how to fix the stiff latch on the side door, how to tell when a child needs space versus company by the specific quality of how they're holding their shoulders. She thought about the deeper things, the ones that don't have clean names. She'd learned that loss is not a problem to be solved. She had come to the Arizona Territory in the wake of a loss that wasn't even hers, a dead man's promise, a stranger's letters, and she'd been in the presence of loss ever since, Cole's and Clara's, and the community's, and eventually her own small version of the life she'd thought she was going to have. Loss doesn't resolve, it becomes part of the structure. You build around it and sometimes through it, and if you're lucky, you build something that the loss made possible that nothing else would have. She'd learned that courage is mostly just persistence with better posture. She didn't think of herself as brave. She'd been scared in the burning barn, and scared in the lawyer's office, and scared in the yard facing Mercer, and she'd done the things anyway because the alternative was failing people who'd trusted her, and she found she couldn't do that. That wasn't courage exactly. It was just a refusal to be the kind of person who lets people down. Nathan had understood that. He'd written it in the middle of a journal in a sentence about persistence, and she'd read it in a way station outside Tucson by lamplight, and recognized it as the description of something she'd been doing her whole life without knowing what to call it. She'd learned that belonging is not a place and not a promise. She had come here for a promise, and the promise was gone, and she'd stayed because a child kissed her on the cheek, and the account books needed reading, and the loan was due in August, and then she'd stayed because she couldn't leave, and then she'd stayed because she didn't want to, and somewhere in that progression, not at one clean moment, but across dozens of ordinary ones, the ranch had become hers in the way that places become yours, not through ownership but through being shaped by them, through caring about what happens to them, through being willing to go back into the burning building. She heard Cole come into the barn behind her. She hadn't heard him cross the yard. He moved quietly, always had, but she'd heard the barn door, and she didn't turn around. He came to stand beside her. "Clara's asleep," he said. "Good," she said. They stood in the quiet for a moment. One of the horses, the big roan that Clara had named after a historical figure whose name Evelyn had found surprising and Cole had found typical, moved in its stall with the soft, deliberate weight of an animal that has decided the night is fine. "Good barn," Cole said. She looked up at the roof, at the beam line, at the west wall that Clara had remembered, and the Reindorf boy had framed right. "It is," she said. He put his arm around her. Not dramatically, not as a statement, just the simple placement of a solid presence against her shoulder in the way of a man who has learned, slowly, that some things don't need to be performed to be real. She leaned into it. Outside, the Arizona night was doing its extravagant thing. The stars filled the sky the way they do in country, where nothing stands between you and the distance. Profligate, indifferent, brilliant, the way the world is when it isn't watching you, and you get to see what it actually looks like. Nathan Cross had written about those stars in his third letter. He'd written about how they made everything feel both very large and very manageable at the same time, which she'd thought was a contradiction when she'd read it in Philadelphia and understood completely now. Some things you can only understand from inside them. She thought about the woman who had stood on the platform and at Denton Station in May of the previous year with a trunk that held 14 letters tied with string and nowhere to go. And she thought, that woman made every choice that led here. Not the right choices, not the planned choices, the available ones, the ones in front of her on the day she had to make them. She'd stayed when she should have left and asked when she should have been quiet and gone back in when the building was on fire. And none of it had been clean or graceful or certain, and all of it had added up to this barn, this night, this arm across her shoulders, this life that was not the one she'd planned and was more than she'd known to ask for. There is something worth understanding in that. Not a lesson exactly. Life doesn't deliver lessons. It delivers events, and the understanding comes later, if at all. But something worth sitting with, that the future you lose is sometimes the gate to the one you'd never have found otherwise. That the people who hold a place together in the dark earn the right to call it home in the light. That documentation matters, persistence matters, neighbors who show up with lumber and coffee matter more than they're usually given credit for. That a child who trusts you is not a small thing. That a man who means what he doesn't say is still saying it, and learning to hear that is its own kind of literacy. And that sometimes a dead man's last provision is a living woman's beginning. Evelyn Carter Cross stood in the barn she'd helped build in the country she'd helped save and leaned against the man she hadn't come for and listened to the horses breathe and let the August night be what it was, sufficient, and hers, and enough.